Prologue. Lu Jin died in a stairwell on a Tuesday. He had been climbing the 7th flight to a meeting he had no intention of attending sober when the marble shifted under his right foot and the world tilted, and there was a single bright second of awe before his temple struck the lower banister. He had been 34. He had been the kind of man whose obituary would say promising career in private equity and fondly remembered by colleagues and nothing else, because nothing else was true. The light went out. The light came back on. The light was the wrong color. Part 1. A Small Mountain. Chapter 1. The Body on the Stone. The body he opened his eyes inside was 16 years old, thin, half-starved, and bleeding from the left ear. He knew this because he could feel it. The ear ached in the same throbbing way his temple had ached for the half-second before the stairwell. The thinness was in the wrist he saw when he lifted his hands. The age was in the smoothness of the skin. The hunger was in the cavity below his ribs, which felt like a room someone had carried furniture out of. He was lying on flat black stone in the middle of a courtyard. The courtyard was lit by oil torches set into iron brackets along its 4 walls. The walls were stone, taller than the torches, capped with curved tile that suggested a pagoda roof somewhere above his line of sight. There was a tree in the courtyard, a small twisted pine in a clay pot the size of a horse. The pine looked older than the courtyard. He sat up. Pain rolled across the back of his skull and settled there. He let it. He had been hit harder in college, by men he had paid to hit him in a boxing gym, and pain in his old life had been something he had managed by closing the door on it. He closed the door now. A voice in his head said, "Initiation complete." He looked around the courtyard. Empty. The voice was inside. He sat very still and waited. The voice said, "Subject, L. Eugene, age 16. Status, junior outer disciple, Azure Wind sect, middle courtyard. Assignment follows." He waited again. Assignment. 7 marked individuals have been placed in this world. Each is a chosen one. Each bears the favor of a power you do not need to understand. Your task is to remove them. On the death of each, you will receive compensation. The nature of the compensation will be revealed on the first kill. No further guidance will be provided. He waited. Additional notes. You will not be told who they are. You will not be told where they are. You will not be told how to recognize them. They will not be told about you. Success depends on your own attention. Failure has no consequence except that you remain as you are. And the voice cut off. He sat in the courtyard with the dead silence of his own head ringing in his ears and waited for it to come back. It did not come back. He counted to 100. Still gone. He counted again. Gone. Then, very slowly, the corner of his mouth lifted. He did not laugh. The body did not have the breath for it. But the corner of his mouth lifted and stayed there for a long moment, and the boy in the body, who had been someone before he had been Lu Jin, would not have recognized the expression on his own face. 7 targets. No quest log. No minimap. No friendly narrator pointing arrows at heads. Just a bare contract and a body too thin to hold the brush. He had spent his old life moving money no one had given him permission to move. And he had been good at it because he had been patient and quiet and had understood, before he had understood anything else, that the people who won were the ones who watched the room longer than anyone else watched the room. He had never killed a man. He had ruined 3. The ruining had been more satisfying than any kill would have been, because in each of those 3 the man had not known, until the last week, that the ruin was happening, and by then it was finished. 7 targets. With no instructions on how to find them, in a world that ran on rules he had not yet read, in a body that could not yet lift its own arm above its head without trembling. He was going to enjoy this. He levered himself onto his feet. The world swam. He waited. It settled. Footsteps came in through the courtyard's east gate. He turned. The footsteps belonged to a boy of perhaps 14. In the same dull gray robe Lu Jin discovered he himself was wearing, carrying a wooden bucket of water and a clean cloth. The boy's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Surprise that the figure on the stones was upright, relief that he was upright, and then a careful blank that suggested years of practice at not showing what he was thinking. The boy said, "Senior brother Lou, Master Yin sent water for your ear." Lu Jin made his face into the right shape. He had been making his face into the right shape since he was 8 years old. The shape this time was grateful, tired, slightly confused. The shape of a boy who had just woken from a beating and was glad to see a friendly face. He had no idea who Master Yin was. He had no idea who this boy was. He had no idea what the beating had been for. He said, "Thank you. Set it down. I will manage." The boy set the bucket down by his feet. He bowed. He did not leave. He hovered. Lu Jin looked at him. The look took perhaps 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, he took inventory of what the boy was doing in the courtyard. The fact that the boy had not been sent by Master Yin, because the water and the cloth had been waiting in the boy's hands too long to have come from a kitchen, and the fact that the boy's eyes were not on Lu Jin's face, but on Lu Jin's right hand, where a small piece of folded paper had, Lu Jin only now noticed it, been clenched between thumb and palm since he had opened his eyes. He had not put the paper there. The body had. The body, he realized with a slow cold pleasure, had been doing something before he had moved in. The body had been planning something. The body had been bleeding in this courtyard not because of a random beating, but because someone had wanted the body silent, and the body had been here to pass that piece of paper to the boy with the bucket. He opened his hand. He held the paper out. The boy took it. The boy bowed deeper than the first time and was gone through the east gate before the bow had finished moving. Lu Jin watched him go. The corner of his mouth lifted again. He had inherited a conspiracy. He had no idea what it was. He had no idea who was in it. He had no idea what the paper had said. He picked up the bucket. He washed the blood from his left ear with the cloth. He walked toward the north gate, which was the gate his feet seemed to know how to find, and he went looking for his own room. The Azure Wind sect, whatever it was, had a problem in its middle courtyard. The problem had been a sickly boy with a bleeding ear. The problem was now something else. Chapter 2. The Room at the End. The room at the end of the dormitory corridor was the smallest of the 8 rooms on the corridor. It had no window. It had a straw pallet, a folded blanket the color of mud, a low writing table that wobbled, a brush that had lost half its bristles, and a single oil lamp set into a stone niche by the door. The door was a thin wooden slab with no lock. The body knew the room. He stepped inside. He closed the door. He sat on the pallet. He let his eyes close. The body's memories were not gone. They were arranged behind a thin wall, and the wall was the kind a man could push through if he leaned on it. He leaned on it now. The memories came through in slow drifts, like silt through cold water. The boy whose body this was had also been named Lu Jin. The coincidence of the name was either generous of the universe or a piece of the same hand that had written the assignment in his head. He did not, in this hour, care which. This Lu Jin had been 16. He had been the 3rd son of a minor merchant family from a town called Wei Pu, 2 days' walk south of the Azure Wind sect's main gate. He had been brought to the sect at 12, on the strength of a passing examination by a junior sect elder who had stopped at Wei Pu on a recruitment circuit and had marked the boy as carrying the minimum chi sensitivity required for outer disciple training. The family had paid the entrance fee with most of their year's profit. The family had not heard from the boy since. The boy had not written. The reason he had not written was that, in the 4 years between his arrival and his death, he had not had a single piece of news worth sending home. He had been one of perhaps 300 outer disciples at the sect. He had failed 3 rounds of advancement examinations. He had been beaten by senior brothers on 6 occasions. He had eaten twice a day. He had practiced the sect's basic chi circulation form, which was called the 3 breaths of the quiet cloud, for 4 hours every morning and 4 hours every evening. He had advanced his cultivation from the 1st node of the 1st foundation to the 2nd node of the 1st foundation. Most outer disciples reached the third foundation by his age. Most reached the fourth before they were 20. He had been, by every measure of the sect's internal ranking, useless. He had been about to be expelled. The beating in the courtyard had been from a senior brother named Wu Hong, who had wanted the boy's straw pallet for a friend of his. Wu Hong had used a wooden practice sword. The blow to the left ear had been heavier than Wu Hong had intended. The boy had passed out. The boy had died, somewhere in the moment between Wu Hong's blow and the new tenant's arrival, of a hemorrhage in the inner ear. The paper in his hand had been a note to the boy with the bucket. The boy was named Xiao Sheng. Xiao Sheng was 12. Xiao Sheng had been the only other person in the sect who had spoken to Lu Jin in his last 6 months. The note had said, "If they take me to Master Yin tonight, do not come looking. Run." The new tenant opened his eyes. He held the inherited memories in his head the way he had held briefing folders in his old life, as data, sorted, indexed, ready for use, but not as identity. He was Lu Jin in name and in body. The boy who had owned the body before him had died of a wooden sword and had been so unimportant that his death had not been noticed by anyone at the sect except a 12-year-old kitchen runner who had been told to flee. The new tenant was going to use the unimportance. The unimportance was the most valuable asset he had been given. He understood this in the same way he had understood, on his first morning at his first job, that being underestimated was the only consistent advantage available to a young man with nothing else. Being underestimated meant being looked past. Being looked past meant being free to move. He stood up. His knees did not buckle. The body was stronger than the body's memories suggested. The boy who had owned the body had been stronger than the boy himself had believed. The boy had been carrying a fear that had eaten his strength from the inside. The new tenant did not carry that fear. He folded the muddy blanket. He folded it neatly, the way the boy had never folded it. He set it on the pallet. He looked around the small room and made an inventory of what he had to work with. He had a body in the second node of the first foundation, a name that was on the sect's expulsion list, 12 oil lamp hours of solitude before the morning bell, a kitchen runner named Xiao Sheng who was the only person in the sect who would speak to him, and an assignment from a voice in his head that involved finding and killing 7 people he could not identify. He had no weapons. He had no money. He had no allies of any rank. He had no friends. He sat down at the wobbly writing table. He pulled the broken brush toward himself. He dipped it into the dry inkstone, then onto the floor's water from the bucket, then back to the ink. He smoothed a piece of scrap paper from the table's small drawer. He began to write, in a hand that was neater than the body's hand had ever been, a list. The list had 3 columns. The first column was titled, in the body's own clumsy script. He kept the script clumsy on purpose. People who spoke to me. Under it he wrote, Xiao Sheng, kitchen. The second was titled People Who Hit Me. Under it, Wu Hong, outer disciple, senior brother, 20, Hebo, outer disciple, senior brother, 19, Hebo's 3 friends, Master Yin, instructor, 5th foundation, age unknown. The third was titled People Who Watched. Under it he wrote, very slowly, for names. The 4 names were the names of the 4 senior outer disciples who had been in the courtyard when Wu Hong had hit the boy and who had not intervened. The body remembered each of them. The new tenant remembered them now too. He looked at the list for a long count. Then, very deliberately, he tore the paper in half, then quarters, then eighths, and he ate the pieces one by one with sips of water from the bucket. He did not write down the list of names again. He had it now. The lamp burned low. The sect's bells rang at the second mark of morning. He lay down on the pallet and slept for 4 hours and 40 minutes. He woke at the 3rd bell and went out into the corridor and washed his face at the corridor's water trough and walked to the morning training field in his place at the back of the outer disciples' line, with his eyes lowered and his shoulders rounded and his hands folded in front of him in the posture of the boy who had owned the body before him. He did not look at any of the 4 names from his list. They did not look at him either. They did not need to. They had already forgotten he existed. He let them forget. He spent his fourth morning of cultivation that day pretending to fail at the first node of the first foundation. The body had reached the second node. The first node was a step backward. He performed the backward step convincingly. The instructor on the field, a thin woman named Junior Master Pei, whom the body remembered as harmless and inattentive, watched him for less than 3 seconds before her eyes slid past him to the next disciple in the line. By the end of the morning, the new tenant had, in the privacy of his own body, where no one could see, quietly broken through the third node of the first foundation. It had taken him 40 minutes. The boy who had owned the body had been blocked, for 2 years, by a piece of mental scaffolding the boy had built to protect himself from his own father's voice, which had told him from the age of 4 that he would amount to nothing. The new tenant did not have the boy's father in his head. The new tenant had no voices in his head except the one that had told him about the 7, and that voice had not spoken since. He cultivated. Chapter 3. Xiaosheng. He did not see Xiaosheng for 3 days. On the 4th day, the kitchen runner appeared at the edge of the dining hall at the second meal, carrying a tray of bread, looking for him. The boy's eyes went around the room twice, found him at the back corner where the bullied disciples ate, and lit with the careful relief of a child who had been afraid an older friend was dead. Lu Jin lowered his eyes to his bowl of millet. He did not look up when Xiaosheng set a piece of bread on his tray and walked past without speaking. He did not look up when Xiaosheng cleared the empty bowls from the table beside him 5 minutes later. He waited until the boy had finished the dining hall's rounds and had walked back out toward the kitchen. Then, very casually, he stood up, took his own bowl to the wash basin at the hall's east door, and exited through the kitchen corridor. He caught the boy in the dry goods storeroom. Xiaosheng was small for 12. He had a face that was already the face of a man. Thin cheeks, sharp eyes, the kind of mouth that did not smile often. He looked up at Lu Jin from the rice barrel he had been measuring and went very still. Lu Jin closed the storeroom door behind him. He said, "Xiaosheng, senior brother, you read the note." "I read it." "Did you run?" The boy looked at him. His eyes were calm. They were the calm of a child who had been calmly afraid for a long time and had learned that the calm was the only thing that kept the fear from becoming visible. He said, "I did not. I was going to. Then I saw you in the courtyard the next morning, alive. So I did not." "Good." Lu Jin sat down on the upended barrel beside the rice. He kept his posture loose. He kept his voice low. The boy was, by every read he had taken since the dining hall, the kind of asset that did not respond well to pressure. The boy was going to respond to attention. He said, "Tell me everything you know about Master Yin." Xiaosheng did not move. He said, after a count, "Senior brother." The Lu Jin who wrote me that note would not have asked me that question. The Lu Jin who wrote me that note was afraid of Master Yin. The Lu Jin who is sitting on the barrel is not afraid of Master Yin. I would like to know who you are before I tell you anything about Master Yin. The corner of Lu Jin's mouth lifted very slightly. He let it. He said, "I am Lu Jin. I am the same Lu Jin who wrote you that note." The Lu Jin who wrote the note was afraid because he was about to be killed by an instructor of the 5th foundation. The Lu Jin who is sitting on the barrel is not afraid because he is not, anymore, about to be killed. The change in fear has changed everything else about my face that you are reading. That is all the explanation you are getting. Do not press it. You will not get a better one. The question stands. Tell me everything you know about Master Yin. The boy looked at him. The boy looked at him for a long count. Lu Jin let him look. He did not move his eyes. He did not perform. He did not pretend to be the boy with the bleeding ear. He simply held the boy's gaze with the flat, patient attention he had used in conference rooms in his old life to break men twice his age. The boy did not break. The boy was 12 and starving and a kitchen runner at a third-tier sect, and he had the spine of someone who would, in another life, and with another set of starting cards, have been the kind of man who ran a small, careful empire from a back room in a city he had never let anyone photograph. The boy said, finally, "Senior brother, I will tell you what I know on a single term." "Name it." "You do not. When you act on what I tell you, leave me to be the one who is found out." "Acceptable. You will be the last person any investigation traces. I will set up enough other tracks that the search will exhaust itself on the wrong man. You have my word." "The word is the word of the man on this barrel. The man on this barrel does not, by his own preference, waste his word." The boy held his eyes for another count. Then he sat down across from Lu Jin on a sack of dried beans, and he began to talk. Master Yin was an instructor of the Fifth Foundation, age 51, in his 11th year at the Azure Wind sect. He had been brought to the sect from a smaller mountain school by the sect's previous senior elder, who had died 7 years ago. He had no formal position within the sect's leadership. He had, however, a quiet operational hand in the assignment of outer disciples to senior brothers, and over the 11 years of his tenure he had used the hand to move junior disciples into the personal custody of senior brothers whose preferences ran in a particular direction the sect did not publicly acknowledge. The particular direction involved the deaths of those junior disciples. The deaths were never officially counted. The deaths were spread across the 11 years at a rate of perhaps 2 or 3 a year. Each death was logged as an accident: a fall during cultivation practice, a drowning in the sect's reflection pool, a sudden fever, a wasting condition. The sect's senior physician, a master who was on Master Yan's quiet payroll. The sect's records office, run by a senior records keeper named Zhou, was on the same payroll. The deaths involved 26 junior disciples across 11 years. Lu Jin had been the 27th. The reason Lu Jin had been selected was that he had, in the previous month, accidentally seen Master Yin in the Eastern Grove behind the senior pavilion at an hour when Master Yin should not have been in the Eastern Grove. Master Yin had been in the grove with the body of a junior disciple named Mei, age 14, who had been reported the next morning as having died of a sudden weakness of the heart. The boy had not understood what he had seen. The boy had reported it to no one. The boy had, however, been seen by Master Yin as he had stepped behind a tree at the edge of the grove and run. Master Yin had marked the boy. Master Yin had arranged, in the 4 weeks since, for Wu Hong to begin the bullying that would culminate in the death the sect would log as fell during practice and struck head against stone. The boy had written his note to Xiao Sheng the night before the courtyard. He had told Xiao Sheng to run because he had. The body remembered this clearly now, accepted that he was about to be killed, and had not wanted Xiao Sheng to be the second body to be reported as a sudden weakness of the heart. Xiao Sheng had been on Master Yan's list for 4 months. Lu Jin sat on the barrel in the storeroom and listened to all of this without moving. When the boy finished, he sat for a long count. He said, very quietly, "Xiao Sheng, senior brother, you knew this. You did not tell me. You let me walk into the courtyard. I told you in the note." The note said to run. The note did not say why. The note was written by you. "I am, senior brother, telling you now what I had been planning to tell you the next morning. I had been planning to wake you at the 3rd bell and to tell you everything in this storeroom. I had been planning to leave with you that morning. The courtyard happened the night before. You did not, by the body's count, send the note in time for me to act. I read the note at the 2nd bell of morning. By the 2nd bell you were already in the courtyard." Lu Jin looked at the boy in the storeroom's lamp. He had been preparing to be quietly disappointed in the only ally he had in the sect. He found instead that the ally was someone the body had badly misjudged. The boy had been planning to leave with him. The boy had been carrying, at 12, the operational load of a working partnership the body had never noticed. He said, "Xiao Sheng, senior brother, how many of the names on Master Yan's quiet payroll do you know?" 11, including the senior brothers. "Names, please." "In a moment. First, one question. The list of the 26 junior disciples who died. Do you have any record of it? Not the official one. The unofficial. I have a list. In my head. I have kept it in my head because anything I wrote down would be found. Recite it. The boy recited it. The recitation took 6 minutes. 26 names. 26 dates. 26 manner of death entries. Each one the cover story master Yin had arranged, and against each one a brief note in the boy's flat, clear voice of what had actually killed the disciple. Lu Jin did not interrupt. He held the list in his head as the boy read it. He had a good memory for lists. He had built his old life on a good memory for lists. When the boy finished, Lu Jin said, "Now the 11 names on the payroll." The boy recited them. 5 senior outer disciples. Master Hu the physician. Zhou the records keeper. 2 other instructors of mid-rank. The sect's gate captain. And the sect's senior accountant, a man named Bai. Lu Jin sat in the storeroom's lamp for a long count after the boy finished. He said, "Xiao Sheng, senior brother, I am going to do 3 things across the next 4 months. I am telling you the 3 things because you have just given me the operational picture I will need to do them, and because you are the only person in this sect whose continued breathing matters to me. The 3 things are, first, I am going to advance my cultivation to the 4th foundation quietly, so that no one at this sect identifies the advancement until I have left. Second, I am going to kill Master Yin in a manner the sect will record as an accidental injury during private cultivation. Third, I am going to take you out of this sect with me on the morning after Master Yin is found. We will leave on foot. We will walk west, not south, because south is where Wei Pu is and Wei Pu is where they will look first. You will, from this evening forward, behave around me exactly as you have behaved for the past 8 months. You will not eat at my table. You will not speak to me in any room with witnesses. You will leave bread on my tray when you can. You will report to me, in this storeroom, on the same day of each week. The day will be the 3rd day. The bell will be the 2nd of evening. Will the schedule work for you?" The boy looked at him in the lamp. "The schedule will work." "Good. One further thing. The note I gave you yesterday. Do you still have it?" "I burned it." "Good. Burn the 11 names too. Burn the 26. Hold them in your head only. If you ever, between now and the morning we walk west, find yourself in a position where someone might recover anything written, kill the writing first and the someone after. Are we clear?" "Clear. Then go finish the rice. I will see you in this storeroom in 7 days." The boy stood up. He bowed, a precise short bow, not the bow of a junior to a senior, but the bow of one operator to another. He left the storeroom by the south door. Lu Jin sat on the barrel for another 2 minutes. Then he stood up, smoothed the front of his outer disciple's robe, walked back into the dining hall, finished his bowl of millet, and went to the evening cultivation field with his eyes on the ground and his shoulders rounded and his hands folded in front of him in the posture of the boy who had been beaten in a courtyard 4 days ago and who had not yet recovered. By the end of the evening cultivation he had broken through, in private, the 5th node of the 1st foundation. By the end of the 3rd week, he was at the 1st node of the 2nd foundation. By the end of the 3rd month, he was at the 3rd node of the 3rd. The sect's instructors did not notice. The sect's instructors did not notice because Lu Jin's outward performance at every public cultivation session was carefully, consistently, exactly at the 1st node of the 1st foundation. He failed each foundation test with the same expression of tired embarrassment. He took the same dismissive treatment from the same senior brothers without resistance. He bowed when he was supposed to bow. He shuffled when he was supposed to shuffle. He kept his hands folded. In the small dark room at the end of the dormitory corridor, at night, in the 7 hours between the 2nd bell of morning and the 3rd bell of dawn, he cultivated like a man who had something better to do than sleep. He did. He had 7 things to do. The first was Master Yin. Chapter 4, The Eastern Grove. He did not kill Master Yin in the Eastern Grove. He had considered it. The grove had been the obvious location. It had been the place where Master Yin had been seen with the body of the disciple named Mei, and the symbolism of returning to the grove for the killing had a satisfaction Lu Jin briefly considered indulging. He decided against it. Symbolism was for men who needed an audience for their work. He did not need an audience. He needed Master Yin dead in a manner that produced the cover story he had already drafted. The cover story was an accident during cultivation. Cultivators of the Fifth Foundation died of accidents during cultivation occasionally. The accidents had specific shapes. Most involved an interruption of the cultivator's chi cycle by an external disturbance during a particular advanced practice the cultivator had been trying to perform. The interruption produced what was called a chi reversal, a backflow of the cultivator's accumulated chi through their meridians in the wrong direction, which could rupture the meridian system if the practitioner could not stabilize within seconds. Cultivators at the Fifth Foundation could stabilize from most reversals. Cultivators at the Fifth Foundation could not stabilize from a particular kind of reversal that occurred when the practitioner attempted to perform the most advanced of the Fifth Foundation circulation patterns, called the reverse mountain circulation, at a moment when the practitioner's chi reserves had been quietly reduced over the preceding week by a slow poison administered in small doses through their drinking water. The poison existed. The poison was made from the root of a plant called night willow, which grew on the cliffs above the eastern grove. The poison was undetectable by the sex physician's standard testing methods because the sex physician was Master Hu, and Master Hu was on Master Yan's quiet peril, and Master Hu had been the one who had originally identified, 11 years ago, that the standard methods would not detect it. Master Hu had identified the property because he had been planning, at the time, to use the poison on a senior brother whose disappearance had been useful to Master Yin. The boy had not known this. The boy had not had the operational picture. Xiaosheng had not known this either. Xiaosheng had known that Master Hu was on the payroll, but he had not known the technical method. Lu Jin had pieced it together from the body's accumulated memories of overheard fragments at the sect's kitchen, the dining hall, the dormitory corridor's walls, and the brief 2-second exchange he had once witnessed between Master Yin and Master Hu at the edge of the eastern grove 4 months before the body's death. The body had not understood what it had seen. The body had registered the fragments without understanding their meaning. The new tenant understood the meaning. The meaning had been, Master Yin and Master Hu had used the night willow poison on at least 4 of the 26. Lu Jin had spent 6 weeks confirming the technical details. He had done the confirmation by sneaking into the sect's medical library at the second bell of morning across 9 separate nights and reading the texts on poisons and cultivation accidents in their original sealed bindings. The boy could not have gotten into the medical library. The new tenant got in by the simple method of having watched, in his old life, how locks on a particular kind of bronze cabinet were set up, and by recognizing that the medical library's locks were the same family of locks. He had picked them with a sharpened sliver of bone he had taken from the dining hall scrap bowl. The texts in the library had told him exactly how Master Yin was going to die. He prepared the poison himself across the 11th and 12th weeks. The night willow grew on the eastern cliffs. He climbed the cliffs at the 3rd bell of night, 3 nights in a row, and collected enough root to brew a 6-week supply. He prepared the brew in the storeroom where he met Xiaosheng on the 3rd evening of the 11th week, with Xiaosheng standing guard at the door. In the 13th week, he began introducing the poison into Master Yan's drinking water. The introduction was not direct. Lu Jin did not approach Master Yan's quarters. He approached, instead, the small stone basin that fed the senior pavilion's water cistern, which fed Master Yan's chambers along with the chambers of 3 other instructors. He introduced the poison into the basin at 1 in 8 strength. The dilution would, by his careful calculation, deliver an effective dose to Master Yin over the course of 7 days, while remaining well below the dose that would affect any of the other 3 instructors, none of whom were on the cusp of attempting the reverse mountain circulation. Master Yin was on the cusp. Master Yin was on the cusp because Master Yin had been attempting, for the past 3 months, to break through to the 6th foundation. The reverse mountain circulation was the breakthrough technique. Master Yin would attempt it within the month. The sect's instructors who were attempting major breakthroughs always attempted them at a particular phase of the moon, which was called the dark phase, which fell on the new moon. The new moon was 19 days away. Lu Jin maintained the poison's introduction for 7 of those 19 days. He stopped on the 8th day. He cleaned the residue from the basin with 3 pours of fresh water. By the 9th day, there was no trace of night willow in the senior pavilion cistern. Master Yin attempted the reverse mountain circulation at the second bell of morning of the new moon, in his private cultivation chamber, alone, with his door locked and his attendants dismissed for the night, as every cultivator at the 5th foundation did when attempting a major breakthrough. Master Yin died at the 3rd bell. His body was found at the 7th bell by the senior pavilion's morning attendant. Master Hu performed the examination. Master Hu's report, filed with Zhou the records keeper, identified the cause of death as spontaneous qi reversal during attempted breakthrough, no external factors observed. The report was filed by the 11th bell. The sect's senior elder accepted the report without comment. Master Yin was cremated at the 3rd bell of evening of the same day, by sect tradition for 5th foundation cultivators. Lu Jin attended the cremation in the back row of outer disciples. He bowed at the appropriate moments. He kept his eyes on the ground. He kept his hands folded. The voice in his head said, "First target removed." He went very still in the back row. He had not, until that moment, allowed himself to consider that Master Yin was one of the 7. He had killed Master Yin because Master Yin had been about to kill the body, because Master Yin had been about to kill Xiao Shang, and because Master Yan's 11-year operation against the junior disciples was the kind of operation the new tenant had developed, across years, a particular dislike for. He had killed Master Yin as a piece of work whose justification he had not needed to perform for any audience. The killing had been operational housekeeping. He had not considered that Master Yin might be one of the 7. The voice said, "Compensation, absorption of target's cultivation base. Initiated." The next sensation he felt was the air going out of the world. It did not last long. It lasted perhaps 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, something poured into him along a channel that did not match any of the meridians the sect's texts had described. The channel ran from the crown of his head down through the center of his chest and into the dantian at his lower belly. The pouring was not painful. It was the precise opposite of painful. It was the sensation of a man who had been thirsty for a long time being handed clean water and not stopping until the cup was empty. When it ended, he was at the 7th node of the 4th foundation. He had jumped 6 full foundations and 2 nodes in 4 seconds. He did not move. He held his face exactly as it had been before the absorption. He kept his eyes on the ground. He kept his hands folded. He kept his shoulders rounded. The disciples on either side of him had not noticed anything. The instructors at the front of the ceremony had not noticed. Master Yin's pyre was still burning. The sect's senior elder was still chanting the closing benediction. The voice said, "Target was a 7th path practitioner. Subject has absorbed the base of a 7th path practitioner of 5th foundation. Subject's current foundation aligned to 7th path. 6 remain." And the voice cut off. Lu Jin stood in the back row with the wind from the pyre blowing the smell of the cremation across his face. He did not let the corner of his mouth lift. He let it lift only in the small dark cavity behind his sternum, where no one could see it. Master Yin had been a chosen one. Master Yin had been one of the 7. The cosmic favor whose system had assigned Lu Jin the 7 targets had marked, as one of those targets, a 5th foundation instructor at the Azure Wind sect who had spent 11 years quietly killing junior disciples in pursuit of his own breakthrough to the 6th foundation, which he had been chasing because the 7th path tradition he was practicing required, by its hidden mechanism, the deaths of cultivators younger than him whose own qi he could harvest for his own advancement. Master Yin had been a chosen one of a path that ran on murdered children. The cosmic favor had marked him. Lu Jin had been sent to kill him. The cosmic favor. Lu Jin understood this with the slow, clean clarity of a man understanding the shape of a deal he had not been told the shape of, had not been generous with the assignment. The cosmic favor had given him 7 targets, none of whom the cosmic favor cared about, and was using him to do the cleaning of the world that the cosmic favor would otherwise have had to do itself. He was the system's knife. He was an assassin in a contract, no different from what he had been in his old life. The compensation was the body's advancement. The clients were the cosmic favor, whoever that was, and the target list had been written by hands he could not see for reasons he had not been told. He thought about this for the rest of the cremation. By the time the senior elder finished the benediction, he had reached his conclusion. The conclusion was that he was going to take the contract. He was going to take it because the targets, judging from Master Yin, were the kind of targets the world was better off without. He was going to take it because the compensation was generous and the contract was open-ended. He was going to take it because he had nothing else to do in this world, and he had liked the work in his old life, and he was looking forward to liking it more in this one. He was, however, going to take it on his own terms. His terms involved doing the work in a manner the cosmic favor had not expected. The cosmic favor had assumed he would chase the targets one at a time, identifying them by some method the cosmic favor had not bothered to specify, killing them as he found them. The cosmic favor had not considered that Lu Jin might, instead, use the assignment as the operational frame for something larger. The something larger was a life. He was not going to spend it as a knife in someone else's hand. He was going to spend it as a man whose hand the knife was in, on a continent he was going to learn, in a system he was going to map, with a small group of people he was going to gather and trust, and at the end of which, when the 7 were dead and the contract was complete, and the cosmic favor had presumably been satisfied, he was going to be the kind of man who would, in his old life, have been the kind of man who ran the building the stairwell was inside of. He had been a small, careful piece of machinery in his old life. He was not going to be small in this one. The senior elder finished the benediction. The disciples bowed. The pyre crackled. Lu Jin walked back to his small dark room at the end of the dormitory corridor and packed his single bowl, his folded blanket, and his broken brush into the cloth bundle the body had been issued at 12. He met Xiao Sheng at the storeroom at the second bell of morning the next day, on schedule, as the schedule he had given the boy 3 months ago had specified. Xiao Sheng was already there. The boy had a second cloth bundle. The boy had a small pouch of dried rice. The boy had a knife in his belt that he had not had 3 months ago, which he had stolen from the kitchen in the past week, and which Lu Jin had asked him to steal in the message Lu Jin had left in the boy's regular dead drop the previous week. The boy said, "Master Yin is dead. He is. I have heard the official report. I have not heard the unofficial one. The sect's instructors believe the official report. Master Who is upset. Master Who does not believe the official report. Master Who suspects an outsider. Master Who has been asking, since the morning Master Yin was found, whether any unfamiliar persons have been seen on the sect's grounds in the past month. He has not asked about disciples. He will not. He cannot conceive of a disciple performing the work. The conception requires admitting that a disciple has the technical knowledge, the cultivation level, and the operational discipline to do it. None of the disciples on his radar match the conception. We are safe for now. We should still leave. We should still leave. We are leaving in an hour. Get the rice. Get the knife. Get whatever else you need. Meet me at the south gate at the 3rd bell. We will walk west by the merchant track. By morning we will be in the foothills below the cliffs. By the 3rd day we will be in the open country beyond the cliffs. From there we will turn south to a town called Hua Hai, which is not your hometown, and not Wei Pu, and not on any list the sect or master who would search. We will stay in Hua Hai for a season. We will, in Hua Hai, begin the next phase of the work." The boy nodded. He said, "Senior brother, Xiao Sheng, what is the next phase of the work?" Lu Jin looked at him in the storeroom's lamp. He said, 6 more. The boy did not ask what he meant. The boy had, across 3 months of weekly meetings in the storeroom and 100 small operational tasks Lu Jin had given him to perform, already inferred that the new Lu Jin was carrying out a piece of work whose full shape the boy did not know and would not, by Lu Jin's preference, be told until the boy was older. The boy had accepted the not knowing. The boy was 12. The boy had decided, in the storeroom 3 months ago, that the man whose word he had taken was the kind of man whose word was worth taking. The boy had not had cause, since then, to revise the decision. The boy said, "I will get the rice." He went. Lu Jin stood in the lamp's light for a long count after the door closed. Then he picked up his cloth bundle, blew out the lamp, and walked out of the azure wind sect through the south gate at the 3rd bell of the morning after Master Yan's cremation, in the company of a 12-year-old kitchen runner with a stolen knife, into a continent he had not yet learned the geography of, in a body he was going to be ruthless in a world he had decided, in the back row of a cremation the day before, was going to belong to him. Part 2. The City on the Water. Chapter 5. Huahai. They reached Huahai on the 22nd day. The city sat in a wide, shallow bay where 3 rivers came down out of the western hills and emptied themselves into the sea by way of a marsh that the city had been built on top of across 900 years of pile driving. Half of Huahai stood on stilts. The other half stood on the high stone wharves that the 3rd dynasty had built when the empire had still believed in stone, and the 2 halves were connected by a tangle of wooden bridges and floating walkways and the rooftop catwalks of a generation of smugglers who had decided, around the time of the 4th dynasty, that a city built on water needed second avenues that the watchmen could not reach. Lu Jin and Xiao Sheng walked into the city through the western land gate at midday. The gate guards looked at them once and waved them through. A boy of 16 and a boy of 12, in the gray robes of disgraced outer disciples of some minor sect, carrying cloth bundles and no weapons more serious than a kitchen knife, were not the kind of arrival the gate guards bothered to question. The guards had been bored. They had stayed bored. Lu Jin took Xiao Sheng to a tea house on the 3rd tier of the central wharves, ordered a pot of the cheapest tea and 2 bowls of millet, and asked the tea house's owner, a woman of perhaps 50 named Madame Lu, for directions to the cheapest dry lodgings in the merchant quarter. Madame Lu pointed him to a boarding house run by a man named Old Pang at the foot of the 3rd wharf. Lu Jin paid for the tea and the millet, thanked Madame Lu with the precise small bow of a junior disciple to a city elder, and walked Xiao Sheng down to Old Pang's boarding house, where he paid for a single room with shared kitchen access for 2 months in advance. The payment used the last of the money Master Yin had. In a piece of luck Lu Jin had not failed to take advantage of, kept in a sealed pouch in his cultivation chamber's wall niche, which Lu Jin had taken on his way out of the sect on the morning of the cremation. Old Pang gave him the room without asking questions. The room had a window onto the bay, a sleeping platform large enough for 2 if they slept head to foot, a brazier for cooking, a small chest for clothes, and a sheet of waxed paper on the wall above the chest that listed, in faded ink, the boarding house's 6 rules. The rules were the usual rules. Lu Jin read them once, registered that the most operationally relevant of them was no fighting on the premises and no women after the 3rd bell of night, and turned to Xiao Sheng. He said, "We are here for the season. We are going to make money. We are going to learn the city. We are not going to be noticed by anyone in any operational sense. By the end of the season, we will know whether the city contains a target, and we will have a plan for what to do about it if it does. Do you have any questions?" The boy said, "Yes." "Name them." "Senior brother." "You said target. You used the word in the sect once also, on the night you described the 4 months. I have not, in the 22 days of walking, asked what you meant. I am asking now." Lu Jin sat down on the sleeping platform. He looked at the boy across the small dim room with the bay's light coming pale through the waxed paper of the window. He had been thinking about this conversation since the second day of walking. He had decided, on the seventh day, that he was going to have it before they reached Hua Hai. He had not had it. He had been waiting for the right room. The right room was this one. The right hour was now. He said, "Sit down." The boy sat on the small chest. Lu Jin said, "I am going to tell you something that I have not told another person in this world. I am going to tell you because you are the only person in this world who has earned the telling, and because the work I am about to do for the next several years cannot be done without an operational partner who knows what the work is. I am giving you the choice of being that partner or of walking away from the room at the end of this conversation with the back rent paid and a letter of introduction to Madame Lu that will get you a job in her tea house for as long as you want it. You will not be punished for walking away. You will not be hunted. You will simply, by walking away, not be in the work. Are you ready to hear what the work is?" The boy looked at him with the calm, careful patience of the kitchen runner who had memorized 26 dates of death in his head and had not, in 3 months at the sect, given Lu Jin a single piece of information that turned out to be wrong. He said, "I am ready." Lu Jin told him. He told him about the stairwell. He told him about the body he had woken up in. He told him about the voice in his head and the 7 targets and the absorption of Master Yan's cultivation. He told him that he had no idea who the other 6 were, no idea where they were, and no idea what the cosmic favor wanted them dead for, except that Master Yan had been the kind of man Lu Jin had already independently decided to kill, and that the cosmic favor's preferences and his own had, on the first target, overlapped. He told him that the work, going forward, was going to be the hunting of the remaining 6. The boy listened. When Lu Jin finished, the boy sat for a long count. He said, "Senior brother, Xiao Sheng, this is a strange story. I do not, by what you have told me, have any way to verify it. I am going to verify it anyway. I am going to verify it by the same method I have used to verify everything you have told me in the past 3 months, which is to wait and see whether your operational predictions come true. Your operational predictions have been correct in every case so far. I have decided, by that record alone, to accept the story for now. I will revise the acceptance if the predictions stop being correct. Fair. The work. Hunting the other 6. I want in. Why? Because I am 12 and I have been a kitchen runner at a 3rd-tier sect for 2 years, and the largest operational responsibility I have ever been given was the weekly meetings in the storeroom. I would like, in the next several years, to be given more. You are the man offering the more. The more involves the kind of work I am suited for. I am, senior brother, choosing to take the offer. Understood. One further condition. Name it. You do not, when the 7 are dead and the work is finished, send me back to a kitchen. You either give me a position in whatever life you build after the work, or you give me the money and the training to build my own. I am asking now because I do not want to assume. Lu Jin looked at the boy in the pale window light. He said, "Xiao Sheng, by the time the 7 are dead, you will be either my second in command or you will be the head of a parallel operation reporting to me. The choice will be yours. There is no version of the end of this work in which you go back to a kitchen. Acceptable? Acceptable." The boy stood up. He bowed. He went out to find the kitchen and to scout the boarding house's other tenants, which had been the operational task Lu Jin had given him for their first afternoon. Lu Jin sat on the platform for a long count after the door closed. He did not, in his old life, easily share large pieces of information with anyone. He had built his career on the principle that information shared was information lost. He had broken the principle now. He had broken it because the boy had earned the information, and because the work ahead was the kind of work that required at least one other operator who could be trusted absolutely, and because, in the small honest part of his thinking that he did not often consult, he had found, in the past 4 months at the sect and the 22 days of walking, that he had begun to like the boy. He had not, in his old life, ever liked another operator. The change was not unwelcome. It was simply new. He stood up, smoothed his robe, and went out to find Madame Lu's tea house again. He had a city to begin learning. Chapter 6. The Money. He learned the city in 3 weeks. The method was the method he had used in his old life to learn any new market. He sat in tea houses and listened. He walked the wharves and noticed who carried what. He loitered outside the offices of the city's largest merchant houses and watched the comings and goings, and he tracked, in a small ledger he kept rolled in his sleeve, every piece of information that struck him as operationally useful. Huahai's economy ran on 4 pieces. The first was salt. The city held the imperial license for the entire western seaboard and shipped salt inland to 23 provinces by way of the canal system. The second was tea. The western hills above the city grew a variety of green tea called winter cloud that the imperial court paid premium prices for, and the city's 11 tea houses controlled the routing of the entire harvest. The third was spirit stones. The city was the western terminus of the spirit stone trade that ran out of the cultivation mines in the southern continent, and 3 of the city's merchant houses had built fortunes by being the brokers between the southern miners and the eastern sects. The fourth was smuggling, which was the unspoken 4th piece, and which was the piece Lu Jin found most interesting. The smuggling moved spirit stones the imperial court had not licensed, cultivation manuals the sects had banned, and the occasional human cargo that no one wrote down. The smuggling was managed by a single operator who held no formal position in the city and whose name appeared on no ledger. The operator's name was Madame Lu. Lu Jin had identified this by the end of his 2nd week in the city, by the simple method of paying attention to who deferred to whom in the tea houses on the central wharves. Madame Lu's tea house was the 3rd largest of the 11. Its public business did not justify its rent. Its rent was paid out of a different pocket, and the pocket was the pocket of every smuggling operation that touched the western wharves, because every such operation had, Lu Jin observed by watching her receive visitors across 9 afternoons, paid Madame Lu her cut at her own back table by the 2nd bell of evening, every other day of the week. Madame Lu ran the smuggling. She also, by Lu Jin's quiet read of her across those same 9 afternoons, ran the closest thing the city had to a quiet intelligence office. He had taken 9 afternoons to reach this read because the read had required confirmation across multiple categories of visitor. The first category had been the smugglers themselves, the kind of men with weather-worn faces who came in at the 2nd bell with leather satchels and left without satchels. The second had been the city's mid-tier merchants, who came in at the 3rd bell with sealed envelopes and left with different sealed envelopes. The third had been the city's senior watchmen, who came in at the 4th bell in plain clothes and drank tea and left with their saucers covering small cloth pouches that had not been on the table when they arrived. The 4th had been a category Lu Jin had not at first known how to classify. Men and women in the robes of mid-tier cultivators who came in at the 5th bell and were taken into Madame Lu's back room for private audiences that lasted no less than an hour and no more than 2. The 4th category was the intelligence work. The cultivators were paying Madame Lu for information about other cultivators. Lu Jin sat with this for 2 more afternoons. Then, on the 11th day of his observation, he walked into Madame Lu's tea house at the 2nd bell of evening, ordered the most expensive pot on her menu, a winter cloud reserve that cost 10 times what he had paid for his first visit's tea, and waited at the small corner table by the side door until Madame Lu had finished with her current smuggler. He paid for the tea with 8 spirit stones. The spirit stones were not the ones Master Yin had kept in his wall niche. The ones from the wall niche had been spent on rent and rice. The 8 he paid with were new. They had been acquired across the previous week by Lu Jin's careful operation against a mid-tier merchant whose books he had identified, by 3 afternoons of watching the merchant's office, as containing an irregularity the merchant did not want anyone to look at. Lu Jin had visited the merchant's home at the 2nd bell of night, 3 nights ago, with the precise hour of the merchant's mistress's weekly visit, and had let himself in by an unlocked side door, and had spent 40 minutes in the merchant's study verifying the irregularity. He had written the verification on a piece of paper, sealed it in a small folded cover, and left it on the merchant's desk. He had returned, the following evening, at the third bell. The merchant had paid him 12 spirit stones to take the paper away. The merchant had not seen Lu Jin's face. The arrangement had been conducted through a series of folded notes Lu Jin had left at the merchant's gatekeeper's stall in the alley behind the merchant's house. The gatekeeper had not seen Lu Jin's face either. Lu Jin had been wearing, on the night of the visit and the evening of the payment, a cheap mid-tier merchant's hat with a wide brim that Xiao Sheng had bought him from the cheapest stall on the second wharf, and a plain dark robe that did not match the sect's gray. The 12 spirit stones had been the start of his operating capital. 8 of them now bought tea from Madame Lu. The other 4 were sewn into the lining of his robe at his left hip. Madame Lu took the 8 spirit stones, looked at him for the first time in the 11 days he had been frequenting her tea house, and registered, by the small lift of her left eyebrow that Lu Jin had noticed her using for amusement at other guests across his 11 days of watching her, that he was paying her in operational currency, not in the casual coin a 16-year-old disgraced disciple ought to have access to. She said, in the dry, low voice of a woman who had been running a city's underworld for 15 years, "Young man, Madame Lu, the 8 stones are for the tea. The tea costs 3. I am aware. The difference is for what? An introduction." She looked at him across the table. She did not move. She said, after a long count, "What kind of introduction?" "The kind you specialize in. I would like to engage the services of your backroom operation for an information retrieval that I will describe in a private conversation. The conversation can take place at your convenience. I am proposing tomorrow at the 5th bell. I will pay for the conversation separately. The 5 stones in front of you are the gratuity for arranging the conversation. If you accept, the gratuity is yours regardless of whether the conversation produces a contract." She studied him for a long count. She said, "You are 16. By the body, yes. By the body. By the body. I am not, in any useful sense, 16. What useful sense? The sense relevant to the conversation we will have tomorrow at the 5th bell." She drank from her own cup of tea. She did not break eye contact. She said, "Accepted. Tomorrow. 5th bell. Backroom. Pay the door girl your standard 1 stone access on the way in. The 5 stones in front of me are mine regardless. The conversation will be billed at 3 stones for the first hour, 2 for each hour after." Acceptable. One further note. Yes. If the conversation reveals that you are wasting my time, the door girl will be instructed to make sure you do not waste anyone else's time again. The instruction is not, in itself, lethal. The instruction is operationally inconvenient. I am informing you now, so you may choose to spend tomorrow's 3 stones somewhere else if you have any doubt about the conversation's value. I have no doubt. Then come at the 5th bell. He bowed. He left. He spent the evening in his room at old Pang's writing, in the same neat hand he had used in his old life on the back of cocktail napkins, the briefing he was going to deliver to Madame Lu the following evening. The briefing did not include any reference to the 7, to the voice, or to his previous life. The briefing was about the second chosen one, whom Lu Jin had, by 3 weeks of observation in Huahai, tentatively identified as the heir of one of the city's 3 spirit stone merchant houses, a young master named Baiyu. Baiyu was 19. He was the second son of the Bai house. He had been groomed since 14 to inherit the Bai house's spirit stone brokerage, which was the second largest of the 3. He had, in the past 2 years, made 3 operational decisions that had advanced the Bai house's brokerage from 3rd largest to 2nd largest, including a hostile takeover of a smaller broker named the Ma family that had been completed by a sequence of moves Lu Jin had not, in his old life, seen executed with such precision by an executive twice Baiyu's age. Baiyu was, by Lu Jin's read, a piece of operational machinery the cosmic favor had quietly installed in Huahai for purposes of building the Bai house into a regional power and then, at the appropriate moment, leveraging the Bai house's wealth for whatever larger plan the cosmic favor was running. Lu Jin did not, in this hour, care what the larger plan was. He cared that Bai Yu was a target. He cared, also, that Bai Yu's removal would create a vacuum in the Huahai spirit stone market that Lu Jin's own operation, the operation he was, by tomorrow's contract with Madame Lu, about to begin building, could begin to fill. The briefing he wrote that evening was 4 pages long. It did not name Bai Yu. It described, in operational detail, the kind of information Madame Lu's backroom would need to gather over the next 4 months for Lu Jin to take a position in the spirit stone market that would, by his calculation, allow him to acquire the Bai house's brokerage when the moment came. The information categories included the Bai house's senior staff's personal vulnerabilities, the family's banking arrangements with the Imperial Treasury, the precise routing of the Bai house's monthly shipments through the Western Canal, and a 4th category that Lu Jin labeled simply as anomalies. Anything in Bai Yu's behavior that did not fit the standard pattern of a 19-year-old merchant heir. The 4th category was the category that would identify Bai Yu as one of the 7. He had not, in 3 weeks of observation, been able to identify Bai Yu's anomalies on his own. He had observed Bai Yu from a distance on 6 occasions and had registered the boy as competent, careful, and unusually self-contained. He had not seen any of the small operational tells he had developed an eye for at the sect, the moments when a target inadvertently revealed knowledge or ability that should not have been available to a person of their visible position. He needed deeper observation. Madame Lu's backroom would provide it. He folded the 4 pages, sealed them in a cover, and set them on the small chest by the platform. He extinguished the lamp. He lay on the platform with his hands behind his head and watched the dark ceiling for a long count. He registered, in the same small part of himself that did not often speak, that he was, for the first time since the stairwell, actually enjoying himself. He had been waiting his entire previous life for the kind of operational room he now had. He had not known he had been waiting. He had thought, in his old life, that the operational room he had then was enough. It had not been enough. The old room had been the kind of room where every move he made could be reversed by a lawyer or a regulator or a senior partner who had a different vision for the firm. The room he was in now had no lawyers, no regulators, no senior partners. It had cultivators of various ranks, merchants with various vulnerabilities, smugglers with various contracts, and a quiet intelligence operation run by a tea house owner who had taken his 5 stones because she had registered, in the moment of their exchange, the precise quality of attention his eyes were carrying. He fell asleep before the 2nd bell. He did not dream. Chapter 7. Madame Lu's Backroom. The conversation at the 5th bell ran for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Madame Lu's backroom was a square stone chamber the size of a junior temple's inner sanctum, lit by 6 oil lamps and iron sconces, furnished with a single low table of dark wood and 4 cushions of dyed leather. The door was a slab of cedar with a heavy iron lock. There were no windows. The walls, by the slight echo Lu Jin's voice produced when he first spoke, were thicker than the standard stone walls of the wharfside buildings. Madame Lu had reinforced them across the years, presumably to ensure that conversations conducted in the room did not leak into the building's adjacent spaces. Lu Jin set his 4-page briefing on the table. He pushed it across to Madame Lu. He waited. She read it. She read it twice. The second reading was slower than the first. When she finished, she set the pages down on the table and looked at him across the lamps. She said, very quietly, "Young man, Madame Lu, you have, in the briefing, described an operation that I have been waiting for 3 years for someone to propose to me. I have not, in those 3 years, met any operator I considered capable of executing it. I have been considering, in the past year, executing it myself. I had not yet committed because the execution requires a front operator whose identity is unconnected to my own. Front operators of the necessary caliber are not easy to find. I am informing you, on the first reading of this briefing, that you are the first operator I have met who I would consider for the role. Consider for the role. Consider. I am not committing. I am informing you that the consideration is open. What does the consideration require to close? She studied him in the lamps. She said, 2 things. First, I need to understand who you are. The briefing identifies you as a 16-year-old disgraced outer disciple of the Azure Wind sect. The operational sophistication of the briefing is not consistent with such a person. I am going to need an explanation. The explanation does not have to be true. It has to be plausible. Second, I am going to need to understand what you want for yourself out of this operation. The briefing implies that you intend to acquire the buy house's brokerage when the moment comes. I am going to need to understand what acquire means in your usage and what your intentions are for the brokerage after acquisition. The Huahai Spirit Stone market is, by my own quiet calculation, a piece of the larger economy that I have been managing for 15 years. I am not going to permit a 16-year-old to take it from the buy house without first understanding what the 16-year-old plans to do with it. He looked at her in the lamps. He took a breath. He said, Madam Lu, I am going to give you both pieces. The first piece is the plausible explanation. The second is the truthful answer. You are going to lie to me on the first. I am going to give you the version of the truth that fits the room. The actual truth is more complicated than the room can hold. The version I give you will be operationally correct for our purposes. It will not, in literal terms, be the whole story. I am informing you of this so you may decide whether to accept the version or to refuse and end the meeting. She studied him. She said, Go on. I will hear the version. I will decide after hearing it. He gave her the version. The version was this. He had been the son of a quiet merchant family in a small coastal city he did not name. His family had been killed 2 years ago by a senior cultivator of a sect his family had crossed in a small operational matter. He had been taken in by a senior operator of the regional intelligence network, a person he did not name, and had been trained for the past 2 years in the operational disciplines that produced the 4-page briefing. He had, at the end of the training, been sent into the Azure Wind sect as a junior agent, on a cover assignment that he had since completed. He had walked out of the sect a month ago, on his own authority, and was now operating independently. He had come to Huahai because Madame Lu's operation had been identified by his training network as the operation most likely to support a new independent operator in the region. He was here to propose a partnership. Madame Lu listened without interrupting. When he finished, she sat for a long count. She said, The version is mostly plausible. It has 2 operational holes. The first hole is that no regional intelligence network in the Western continent has, at this time, the operational capability to train an agent to the level the briefing displays. I have personally vetted every such network across the past 15 years. None of them produce work of this caliber. The second hole is that an operator at your caliber would not, having completed a sect cover assignment, be wandering Huahai looking for partnerships. The operator would have been recovered by the training network and given a new assignment. Your presence here, alone, suggests either that the training network has been compromised or that the training network does not exist. She paused. She said, I am inclined to think the training network does not exist. He held her eyes. She said, The actual truth, in your own description, is more complicated than this room can hold. I will accept that. I will not press you on it. I will operate on the assumption that you are an operator whose actual origin is unusual enough that you cannot disclose it to me at this stage of our acquaintance, and whose operational caliber is high enough that your origin does not, in itself, disqualify you from the partnership. The acceptance is contingent on your continued willingness to be operationally honest with me about every other piece of the work. The first time you lie to me about the operational substance, the partnership ends. I am informing you so you may calibrate. Calibrate it. The second piece. What you want for yourself. He drew a breath. He said, Madam Lu, I want to be, in 5 years, the senior operator of the Western continent. I do not yet know what that means in operational detail. I know that the means by which I will reach that position include the acquisition of the buy houses brokerage, the systematic absorption of 3 other regional brokerages I have not yet identified, the establishment of a relationship with the Imperial Treasury that will give me the licensing position currently held by the buy house, and the cultivation of an intelligence network whose reach is the Western continent's standard frame of reference. I do not intend to displace your operation. I intend to acquire, over 5 years, a portfolio that is complementary to yours. The portfolio's complementarity will require us to work together for the duration. I am proposing that the partnership begin with the buy houses brokerage, on terms that allow your operation to retain its full current scope while my operation acquires the brokerage and the new position it will provide. Your operation will receive, in exchange for the support, a permanent 20% share of the brokerage's profits, with no ceiling and no expiration. Acceptable? She looked at him across the lamps. She did not move for a long count. She said, finally, You have, in the past 5 minutes, described an operational arc that I have been waiting 15 years to find an operator capable of articulating. You have been waiting. I have. I am 63. I have been running this city's underworld since I was 48. I am, by every measure of my own internal accounting, ready to take the next step. The next step requires an operator whose operational vision can absorb my 15 years of work and extend it across the continent. I have, in those 15 years, not met that operator. I am, across this table, in the past 2 hours, meeting him. I am going to take the partnership. I am going to take it on the terms you have proposed. I am going to add one further term that I require for my own protection. Name it. The partnership will be sealed by a personal arrangement between us that is not, in any operational sense, a partnership. It is a personal arrangement that exists outside the partnership and that gives me the operational guarantee that the partnership will not be unilaterally terminated by you at any point in the next 5 years. The personal arrangement will involve your becoming, in matters of my own personal household, a presence whose continued attention to me will be the lever that keeps the partnership in place. I am, young man, being direct about this because I have not, in 15 years, allowed myself to take a partner without such an arrangement. The arrangement is the price of my trust. The trust, once given on these terms, will be absolute. I am informing you so you may decide whether to accept. He looked at her across the lamps. She was 63. She was, by his quiet read of her across the past 3 weeks, the kind of woman who had taken 3 husbands in her life and outlived all of them and had not, by her own preference, taken a 4th. She had a face that had been beautiful at 20 and was, at 63, the kind of face that the years had made interesting rather than merely old. She wore her gray hair coiled at her nape in the manner of a dowager. Her eyes were the pale gray-green of the inner bay's water at dawn. She was not, in any visible sense, asking him for the kind of personal arrangement her words could have been read as offering. She was offering an operational marriage. The marriage would give her the lever she had described. The marriage would give him institutional cover within the city's underworld that he could not, otherwise, acquire in less than a decade. The marriage would also, in operational reality, give him a partner whose mind he had, in 2 hours and 40 minutes across this lamp, registered as the most disciplined and patient operational mind he had encountered in either life. He said, Madam Lu, young man, I accept the term. She studied him. She said, You accept without negotiation. I accept without negotiation because the term gives me operational cover I would otherwise need a decade to acquire, and because the partner the term provides me is, in the past 2 hours and 40 minutes, the most operationally disciplined mind I have met in either of my lives. I am not, by my own assessment, in a position to extract better terms from this conversation by negotiation. I am, instead, accepting your terms in full and trusting that the partnership we build on the acceptance will, across the years, produce outcomes that justify the acceptance." She did not smile. She did, however, sit back in her cushion for the first time in the conversation. She said, after a long count, "The formal ceremony will be conducted in 3 months at the end of the spring festival. The ceremony will be discreet. The city will not be invited. The senior operators of my intelligence office will be invited, as will 3 of the city's senior watchmen who are on the office's payroll, and that will be the full guest list. From this evening forward, the partnership begins operationally. The information retrieval against the buy house begins tomorrow. My senior intelligence operator, a woman named Juan, will brief you at the 3rd bell of evening tomorrow in this room. The intelligence will be delivered to you in stages. The brokerage acquisition will, by my projection, be ready to execute in approximately 7 months. The personal arrangement between now and the ceremony will involve you visiting me at the back room every evening at the 5th bell for tea and conversation. The visits are not, in this phase, anything beyond tea and conversation. The intention is to allow us to know each other before the ceremony. After the ceremony, the arrangement will take whatever shape the 2 of us, in our own private negotiation, decide it takes. Acceptable. Acceptable. She rose. She came around the table to him. She held out her right hand. He took it. He did not bow over it. He held it for a moment in his own, met her eyes across the small distance, and let go. She said, very quietly, "You have the eyes of a man who has lived more than 16 years. I have. We will, in time, speak of it. We will." She walked him to the back room's door. The door girl, a quiet woman of perhaps 30, opened the door without looking at him. He bowed once to Madame Lu and walked out through the tea house's main floor, past the cushions of the evening's tea drinkers, and out into the bay's cold night air. He walked back to old Pang's boarding house with his hands clasped behind his back and the small lamps of the wharves reflecting in the water on his left side. When he got to the room, Xiaosheng was already there, sitting at the small chest, eating a bowl of cold rice. The boy looked up. He said, "Senior brother." "Xiaosheng, how did it go?" Lu Jin sat down on the platform. He said, "We have a partner, the tea house woman. The tea house woman, who is, in operational reality, the senior intelligence operator of the Western continent, whose partnership we have just secured on terms that give us institutional cover, an active information retrieval against the second target, and a 5-year operational arc that will produce, by my projection, the Western continent's senior commercial position in our hands." The boy chewed his rice. He swallowed. He said, "The terms. The terms include a personal arrangement between Madame Lu and me. The arrangement will be formalized in 3 months as a marriage. It is, in operational reality, a piece of the partnership. It is not, in personal reality, anything I had anticipated when I walked into the back room this evening. The arrangement is the price of her trust. I have accepted the price." The boy set the bowl down. He said, "Senior brother, you are 16. She is 63. I am, being direct, because you have given me leave to be, going to ask whether the personal arrangement is one you are operationally comfortable with." Lu Jin looked at the boy in the lamp. He said, "Xiaosheng, I am, by the calendar of this body, 16. I am, by the calendar of the man inside the body, 34. I have lived, in my previous life, the years between 16 and 34. I am not, by any measure of my own internal accounting, a 16-year-old. Madame Lu has registered, by her own read of me in 2 hours and 40 minutes, that I am not a 16-year-old. The arrangement she has proposed is between adults of operational caliber. The age gap is, in operational terms, a non-issue. In personal terms, it will be whatever the 2 of us, in private negotiation, decide it should be. I am not, to your specific question, operationally uncomfortable. I am, in fact, more comfortable with the terms than I would have been with the kind of terms a partnership of this scope might otherwise have demanded. The boy nodded. He said, "Understood." He picked up his bowl. He finished his rice. He set the bowl back down. He said, "One further question." "Yes." "The 7 targets. The cosmic favor. The work that the partnership is now operating on top of. Does Madame Lu know?" "No. She knows that the actual truth of my origin is more complicated than the room could hold. She has accepted the not telling. She will not press it. I will, when the time is right, tell her. The time is not yet right. I am, by my own honest read of the situation, going to wait until after the ceremony to consider telling her. The interval will give me 3 months to assess whether her operational discretion is at the level my disclosure requires. I expect, by my read of her tonight, that her discretion is at that level. I am going to confirm it before committing." The boy nodded again. He said, "Understood." He went to the platform's far side, lay down with his head to the far wall and his feet to Lu Jin's pillow, and was asleep within 10 minutes. Lu Jin sat on the near side of the platform for another hour. He did not, in that hour, plan operationally. He had finished the operational planning. He sat in the small dim room above old Pang's kitchen and let himself, for the first time since the stairwell, simply be present in the body and in the city and in the small fact that the operation he had set in motion at the cremation was now, less than 4 months later, operating at a scale and a pace he had not, in his old life, ever produced in less than 3 years. The 7 were going to take him less time than he had originally projected. The empire that the cosmic favor had quietly seeded with the 7 was going to take him longer. He looked forward to both. He went to sleep at the second bell. Chapter 8. Ruan. Ruan was 31. She was tall, narrow, with hair cut short to her jaw and the brown skin of a woman whose forebears had come from somewhere west of the western continent. She wore men's clothes, plain dark trousers, a high-collared tunic, soft leather boots. She carried a long, thin knife in a sheath at the small of her back and a smaller one in a sleeve at her right wrist. Lu Jin clocked both knives in the first 3 seconds of meeting her. She did not bow. She walked into the back room at the 3rd bell of evening, closed the cedar door behind her, sat down on the cushion across from Lu Jin without invitation, and laid a folded packet of papers on the table between them. She said, "By you. 3 weeks of work. My senior junior, a man named Pao, has been watching the boy since the morning after you signed Madame Lu's terms. I have been collating his reports. The packet contains the collation. Read it now. I will answer questions after you have read." Lu Jin opened the packet. He read for 40 minutes. Ruan sat across the table the entire time without speaking, without moving, without drinking the tea the door girl had brought in. She watched him read. She did not, by any visible sign, register impatience. When he finished, he set the last page down. He said, "Bayu does not sleep. He does not sleep. 3 weeks of observation. Pao has covered every night. The boy has been awake every night between the 3rd bell and the 7th. He has been in his private cultivation chamber. The chamber's lamp has been burning the entire interval. The boy emerges at the 7th bell. He sleeps from the 7th to the 2nd bell of morning, then conducts his daytime business from the 3rd bell forward. The pattern is consistent. 4 hours of sleep. No exceptions. The pattern explains how a 19-year-old has, in 2 years, advanced the buy house's brokerage from 3rd to 2nd. The pattern also explains the anomaly category my briefing requested you investigate. A 19-year-old of any normal background does not have the cultivation discipline to sustain that pattern. A 19-year-old with the cultivation discipline to sustain that pattern does not, by normal background, exist in a merchant family without an external supplier of the discipline." Ruan said, "Keep going." Pao reports that the lamp's oil consumption in the chamber is higher than 4 hours of standard reading or cultivation would account for. The chamber has been receiving deliveries of 3 lamps worth of oil per night across the past 2 years. Pao has tracked the orders through the household steward. The orders go out every 5th day. The total oil per cycle would burn for approximately 20 hours of continuous high-intensity lamp use. The boy is using the chamber for something heavier than reading. Keep going. The chamber's southern wall backs onto an interior courtyard the household uses for cultivation practice. The courtyard has, in the past 2 years, developed a small dead spot in the southern grass, a patch approximately 4 paces square in which the grass has not grown since the boy began his nightly chamber sessions. Pao climbed the boundary wall on his 11th night and confirmed the patch by physical inspection. The grass is not dying from drought or trampling. The grass is dying from concentrated qi exposure. The qi exposure is consistent with a particular kind of advanced cultivation practice in which the practitioner refines stored spirit stone qi through an external focus that vents the spent qi outward at low concentration across an extended period. The focus would be invisible from the chamber's interior. The venting would, across 2 years, kill a patch of grass exactly the size Pao has described. He paused. He said, Baiyu is refining cultivated spirit stones through an external focus at a foundation considerably above the 3rd. The Bai House's public records show his cultivation at the 3rd. He is not at the 3rd. He is at the 5th or above. Ruan finally smiled. It was a thin, sharp smile that did not soften her face. She said, That is the conclusion I reached on the 18th day. I wrote it on the last page of the collation. I wanted to see whether you would reach it independently before reading my conclusion. You reached it in 40 minutes. I am, to be direct with you, impressed. Madame Lu said you were unusual. Madame Lu is conservative in her assessments. You are more than unusual. He looked at her across the lamps. He said, Ruan, young master, do not call me that. What shall I call you? Lu Jin, or senior brother, if you prefer to keep the formality. Young master is the term used for boys with money and no operational competence. I am not one of those. She studied him. She said, Lu Jin, Ruan, the Bai House. Now that we have confirmed Baiyu's cultivation anomaly, how do you want to proceed? He looked at the packet. He said, 2 parallel tracks. The first is the operational track Madame Lu and I agreed on for the brokerage acquisition. That track continues on its current schedule, 7 months, with the actions you and I will plan across the next 4 weeks. The second is the personal track against Baiyu himself. The personal track does not depend on the brokerage acquisition. It runs in parallel. The brokerage will be acquired regardless of what happens to Baiyu personally. I am proposing, however, that Baiyu personally not survive the 7 months. The how of his not surviving will need to be worked out with care, because the Bai House's connection to the Imperial Treasury means his death will receive Imperial-level investigation. I will need your operational input on the how. She nodded. She said, his death receiving Imperial-level investigation is not the constraint you think it is. Explain. Baiyu has, in the past 6 months, been involved in a quiet correspondence with a senior official of the Second Prince's faction at the Imperial Court. The correspondence is not, by my read of the intercepted letters, sanctioned by the Bai House's senior elders. The boy is conducting it on his own. The correspondence concerns the future direction of the Western continent's spirit stone trade in the event of an imperial succession crisis. The Second Prince's faction is preparing for such a crisis. The Bai House, through Baiyu's correspondence, is positioning itself to align with that faction. The senior elders of the Bai House do not yet know. If they learn, they will repudiate the alignment immediately, because the Bai House's existing relationship with the Imperial Treasury is with officials of the First Prince's faction. The boy's correspondence is a piece of operational betrayal of his own house. The betrayal, if exposed, would result in the boy's expulsion from the house, the suspension of the Bai House's brokerage license, and a significant operational opening for any party prepared to step into the void. She paused. She said, I have been preparing the exposure for 2 months. The exposure was originally going to be deployed against the buy house by Madame Lu's own brokerage interests. Madame Lu was planning to use it to extract concessions from the senior elders. The exposure can, instead, be deployed in a manner that does not preserve the boy. The deployment would frame the boy as the sole responsible party, would result in his execution by the Imperial Treasury's Enforcement Office on the standard charge of merchant treason, and would deliver the brokerage license to the senior elder's surviving heir, Bai Yu's older sister, a woman named Bai Mu, who is 23, currently the household's senior administrator, and who has been quietly opposing her brother's rise within the house for the past 3 years. Lu Jin sat very still. He said, Ruan. Lu Jin, the exposure deployed in the manner you describe would, in addition to removing Bai Yu, result in the brokerage license passing to Bai Mu rather than to the Bai house's senior elders. The senior elders' authority would be undermined. The brokerage's effective leadership would pass to the older sister. The older sister has been opposing the boy's rise. The older sister is not yet on our radar. She is on my radar. Go on. Bai Mu, by my own 3 months of observation prior to your arrival in Huahai, is the operator the Bai house should have made its heir if the senior elders had paid attention. They did not. They overlooked her because she is a woman and because her mother was the senior elder's second wife. They favored the boy, who is the son of the first wife. Bai Mu has been operating, since she was 18, on the patient assumption that her father's faction would eventually self-destruct and that she would inherit by default. The boy's correspondence is the self-destruction she has been waiting for. She does not yet know about the correspondence. If she learns about it, through a channel that does not implicate our operation, she will use it. She will use it to do exactly what I have just described. She paused. She said, I have been preparing a courier path to deliver the correspondence's evidence to Bai Mu by means that will read to her as having come from a junior member of the household staff with a personal grievance against her brother. The courier path is ready. The delivery can be made within the week. The investigation, by the Imperial Treasury's standard timeline, would conclude in approximately 4 months. The boy would be executed by the end of the 5th. The brokerage license would pass to Bai Mu by the 6th. By the 7th, Madame Lu's projected timeline for our operation, the brokerage would be operationally available for our acquisition through Bai Mu, who will, at that point, be the new senior of the Bai house, and who will be operationally exhausted by the work of consolidating her position. She will be looking for partners. We will be in position to be those partners. He looked at Ruan across the table. He said, You have been planning this for 2 months. I have been planning the first half. The second half, our partnership with Bai Mu, became operationally possible only on the morning Madame Lu agreed to the terms with you. Before then, my plan terminated at Bai Mu's elevation. After then, the plan extends through the brokerage's acquisition into our hands. The plan is yours. It is mine. I am proposing one modification. The investigation will produce, by its standard procedure, a sentence of execution by beheading at the Imperial Treasury's enforcement compound in the Western Prefecture. The compound is 2 days' ride south of Huahai. I am proposing that I personally attend the execution as a spectator and that the execution occur on a date I can be present for. The reason for the modification is operational. Bai Yu is, by certain criteria I will not disclose to you, an asset whose elimination has additional value to my own operation beyond the brokerage acquisition. The additional value requires my physical presence at his death. The presence will not be remarked because the executions at the Western compound are public and the spectator gallery seats approximately 300. I will be one of 300. Ruan looked at him for a long count. She said, The additional value. You do not need to know. I am willing to confirm that the additional value does not in any way affect the operational outcome of the brokerage acquisition. It is a personal piece of work that runs in parallel. Accepted. I will arrange for the execution to occur on a date you can be present for. The Treasury's Enforcement Office allows the family of the prosecuting party, which will be the house's senior elders, by the legal framing, to request a specific execution date within a 40-day window after sentencing. Madame Lu's relationship with the house's senior steward will allow us to influence the request. The execution will occur on a date you select within the window. You will be in the spectator gallery. The additional value, whatever it is, will be available to you. Ruan. Lu Jin. Thank you. She did not respond to the thanks. She picked up the packet, refolded, and stood up. She said, I will arrive in this room at the third bell of evening every day for the next 4 weeks. We will refine the operational plan together. Madame Lu has authorized me to operate as your liaison until the ceremony, after which point my role will be evaluated by Madame Lu and you jointly. I am, Lu Jin, preferring, by my own initial read, to continue in the liaison role after the ceremony. I am informing you so you may calibrate. He stood up. He said, the liaison role will be ongoing. I will speak with Madame Lu about it before the ceremony. She bowed once, a precise short bow that was not the bow of a junior to a senior, but the bow of an operator to a partner, and walked out of the back room. He stood by the table for a long count after the door closed. Ruan, in his read of her across the past 40 minutes, was the second operator he had met in Hua Hai whose mind was the kind of mind he would have hired in his old life on the spot. She was not Madame Lu's caliber yet. She would be, in a decade. He suspected, and the suspicion would, across the following weeks, develop into a confirmed read, that Madame Lu had been training her for exactly that ascension since Ruan had arrived at the back room 10 years ago at the age of 21. Madame Lu was preparing him with the people she had been preparing for years. He went home to the boarding house with his hands clasped behind his back and his eyes on the dark wharfs. Part 3. The Execution Ground. Chapter 9. Bayou. The execution took place on a clear, bright morning at the start of summer, exactly 5 months and 11 days after the conversation with Ruan in the back room. The Imperial Treasury's Western Enforcement Compound stood at the south end of a wide gravel courtyard outside the small administrative town of Peidu, 2 days' easy ride south of Hua Hai. The compound's south wall held 3 executioners' blocks of dark wood, set in a row, each backed by a high stone screen designed to catch the spray. The spectator gallery rose along the courtyard's east side in 9 tiers of unpainted wooden benches. The gallery's capacity was 312. On the morning of Bayou's execution, 287 of the seats were filled. Lu Jin sat in the 4th tier, near the central aisle, in plain dark clothes, with a brimmed hat pulled low. Xiaosheng sat 2 tiers above him, separately, also in plain clothes. The boy had insisted on coming. Lu Jin had agreed only on the condition that the boy enter the gallery separately, sit separately, and leave separately. The arrangement was operational. The arrangement also let the boy see, with his own eyes, the work the partnership was conducting. Lu Jin had decided, on the 3rd week after the Ruan meeting, that Xiaosheng's continuing operational development required him to begin attending the kinetic phases of the operation in person. The execution was the first of those phases. Bayou was brought out at the 3rd bell of morning. He was 19. He was thin. The 4 months in the Treasury's holding cells had not been kind. His hair had been shaved to the scalp. His hands were bound behind his back. He wore the plain white shroud of the condemned, and he walked between 2 enforcement officers with the slow, tired step of a man whose appeals had all failed and who had, in the past week, registered that the appeals had all failed. He was led to the central block. He did not, in the walk from the holding cell door to the block, look at the spectator gallery. He kept his eyes on the gravel. The senior enforcement officer read out the formal charge. The charge was merchant treason against the Imperial Treasury, with the specific particulars listed across 9 items. The reading took 6 minutes. Bayou did not move during the reading. The officer finished the reading. He asked the condemned whether the condemned had any final statement. Bayu did not answer. The officer waited the prescribed 30 seconds. He nodded to the executioner. The executioner stepped up to the block. In the half-second before the blade fell, Lu Jin felt the air around him pressurize and release. He held very still in the fourth tier. The voice in his head said, "Second target removed. Compensation. Absorption of target's cultivation base. Initiated." The absorption took perhaps 2 seconds. It was different from the absorption of Master Yin. Master Yin's absorption had been a slow, even pour of stable cultivation. Bayu's was a faster, sharper rush, the cultivation of a young man whose advancement had been built on intensity rather than discipline. The qi entered Lu Jin's dantian in a hot, quick wave that he had to steady with 3 breaths before it would settle. He kept his face entirely blank during the steadying. The voice said, "Target was a 9th path practitioner. Subject has absorbed the base of a 9th path practitioner of 6th foundation. Subject's current foundation aligned to 7th and 9th paths, dual aligned. 5 remain." And he sat in the 4th tier with his hands folded in his lap and the bright summer sun coming down on the gravel in front of him. The blade had fallen. Bayu's body had collapsed sideways from the block. The enforcement officers were already lifting it. The crowd in the gallery was making the low, restrained noise of 300 spectators who had come to see an execution and were quietly satisfied with what they had seen. Lu Jin rose with the rest of the gallery at the senior officer's signal, filed out by his assigned aisle, and walked back to the inn at the edge of Pei Du, where he and Xiao Sheng had taken separate rooms. In his room, he closed the door, sat on the bed, and let himself, for 30 seconds, smile. It was a quiet smile. There was no one to see it. He smiled because the second piece of the 7 had been completed, because the operation that had delivered it had been a model of the kind of work he intended to build his life around, because the partnership with Madame Lu and Ruan was producing 3 weeks after his wedding ceremony. Exactly the outcomes the partnership had been built for, and because his cultivation had, in 2 absorptions, advanced from the 2nd node of the 1st foundation to the equivalent of the 6th foundation. In a hidden cultivation system that the cosmic favor had now indicated he was dual aligned to. He did not know what dual aligned meant. He would find out. He stopped smiling. He stood up. He went next door to Xiao Sheng's room, knocked twice, and went in. The boy was sitting on the bed, looking pale. Lu Jin closed the door behind him. He said, "Your first execution." "Yes." "Was it what you expected?" The boy looked up at him. He said, "I had pictured it more dramatic." The blade fell. The body fell. The crowd made a noise. It was, by the standard of the cover story's master Yin used for the 26 junior disciples, almost peaceful. Lu Jin sat down on the bed across from him. He said, "Most operational deaths are. The drama people picture comes from theater. Theater requires the death to mean something to the audience. Real operational death does not require the audience to feel anything. It only requires the target to stop breathing. The boy on the block this morning will be buried in a public grave outside Pei Du by sundown. The Bai House will receive a formal letter of condolence from the Imperial Treasury within the week. Bai Mu will be confirmed as the new senior of the Bai House within the month. The brokerage license will be transferred within 6 weeks. Madame Lu and Ruan and I will be in operational position to acquire the brokerage through Bai Mu by the end of next month. The boy's death is, in the chain of the operation, already an operational detail of the past." The boy nodded slowly. He said, "One further thing." "Yes." "When the blade fell, you closed your eyes for half a second. Was that the absorption thing you described?" Lu Jin looked at him. He had not been aware that he had closed his eyes. He had been making, by his own internal count, an effort to keep his face blank. The boy had picked up on the half-second of eyelid that Lu Jin had not noticed himself producing. He said, "Yes. It was the absorption." The boy was one of the 7. He was. "How do you know to identify them?" Lu Jin sat with the question for a count. He said, I don't, until the cosmic favor confirms it after they're dead. The first target, Master Yin, I killed for separate operational reasons. The cosmic favor identified him as one of the 7 only after the kill. Bai I had inferred, before this morning, was probably a target. The inference was based on his cultivation anomaly. The inference has now been confirmed. The remaining 5 will, by my projection, follow the same pattern. I will identify likely targets by their operational anomalies. I will move on them through whatever channel is most efficient. The cosmic favor will confirm or deny after each kill. What if you kill someone who is not a target? Then the cosmic favor does not confirm. The death is a free operational action with no compensation. I am, to be honest with you, willing to accept that pattern. Most of the operational kills I will conduct across the next several years are going to be on targets the cosmic favor has not marked. Those kills will be the cost of the operational position I am building. The 7 are a piece of that position. They are not the whole of it. The boy registered the answer. He said, understood. He looked at Lu Jin in the dim-in room. He said, after a long count, Senior brother, Xiao Sheng, I think I am going to be all right with this work. I think so too. The boy lay down on his bed. He was asleep within a few minutes. Lu Jin went back to his own room. He spent the night writing, in his sealed operational ledger, the details of the absorption, the dual-aligned status, the 7th and 9th paths, the Dantian's new configuration, the steady warm pressure that had settled across his lower belly as the cultivation integrated. He had no idea what 7th path or 9th path practitioners were. He had not, in the sect's library, found any reference to a path system organized in that manner. The path system, if it existed, was not part of the sect's tradition. It was part of a cosmology the cosmic favor was operating on top of and which Lu Jin would, in the years to come, need to learn enough of to use. He went to sleep at the second bell. He dreamed, for the first time since the stairwell, of a long stone corridor with 7 doors. Each door had a number above it. The number above the first door was 1. The number above the second was 2. Both doors stood open. The remaining 5 doors were closed. He woke at dawn. He did not write the dream down. He saddled his horse, met Xiao Sheng in the inn's courtyard, and they rode north for Huahai together at the second bell of morning. Chapter 10. 2 years in the city. 2 years passed. In those 2 years, the Bai House brokerage came into the hands of the partnership through Bai Mu and Bai Mu, who turned out to be exactly the operator Ruan had predicted, became the second figure of the partnership's operational arm in the Western continent. She held the public face of the brokerage. Madame Lu held the underworld coordination. Ruan held the intelligence office. Lu Jin held the strategic direction. Xiao Sheng, by the second year, had become the partnership's quiet courier and second-tier operator, with a network of his own across 3 cities that the others had no operational view into. Lu Jin's marriage to Madame Lu was, in formal terms, a marriage. In personal terms, it was the kind of arrangement 2 careful operators made when each had something the other valued, and when neither needed the other to be more than what the arrangement required. They lived in the same house. They shared a study. They did not share a bed every night, but they shared one often enough that the household staff knew not to disturb either of them between the 7th bell of evening and the 2nd bell of morning unless the disturbance was operational. In the small hours when they did share the bed, they did not talk about the work. They talked about other things. Madame Lu had been a girl in a fishing village on the southern coast before she had been a tea house owner. She told Lu Jin about that life across the slow nights. He listened. He told her, in return, pieces of his old life, carefully edited, dressed in the cover story he had given her about the regional intelligence network, that gave her a working portrait of who he was without giving her the parts of the truth she could not yet hold. He told her the rest in the 8th month of the marriage. He told her about the 7. He told her about the cosmic favor. He told her about the stairwell. She listened. When he finished, she sat for a long count in the small lamplit study they had been working in across the previous evening's accounts. She said, "Lu Jean, Madame Lu, you have, in 8 months of marriage, given me no operational reason to disbelieve any other thing you have told me. No, I will accept this also. Thank you. I have, in the past 5 months, been wondering when you would tell me." The wondering had become its own piece of waiting. "I am relieved you have told me now. I had begun to fear that the not telling would extend through the entire marriage. It would not have. The telling was always coming. I was waiting until your discretion had been confirmed across enough operational cycles for me to commit. The discretion was confirmed by the 3rd month. I have been waiting since then for the right evening. This evening was the right one." She nodded. She said, "The remaining 5. Remaining 5. How will we identify them?" "By the method that worked for Bayou. Cultivation anomalies. Operational tells. The cosmic favor confirms after the kill. We have been, in the 8 months since Bayou, looking for the next anomaly. Juan has been running quiet observations on 6 candidates I have flagged from the partnership's accumulated intelligence. None of them have produced a confirmed red. The 3rd target is, by my honest assessment, not yet in our operational scope. We may need to extend the operation beyond the Western continent before we identify the 3rd. She nodded again. She said, "The operation can extend. We will extend it." The conversation ended at the 3rd bell of morning. The partnership extended. Across the 2nd year of the marriage, the operation reached into the central continent. Juan opened a branch of the intelligence office in the central trading city of Jincheng. With a senior operator, she had personally trained running it undercover as a mid-tier silk merchant. Xiao Sheng, by then 15 years old, taller and quieter than he had been in the storeroom 3 years before, became the partnership's senior courier between the Western and Central operations. Bai Mu, in the same period, used the brokerage's expanded reach to open spirit stone trading relationships with 3 Central Continent merchant houses, 2 of which became, by the 2nd year's end, junior partners in a continent-wide structure the partnership had begun to refer to internally as the quiet trade. The quiet trade was not, in any public sense, a single organization. It was a coordinated network of merchant houses, intelligence offices, smuggling routes, and informal alliances that the partnership had assembled by the careful application of leverage, money, and Madame Lu's accumulated relationships across her 15 years of running Huahai. The network's annual revenue, by the end of the 2nd year, was approximately 3 times the revenue of the Imperial Treasury's official Spirit Stone licensing operation. The Imperial Treasury did not know. The network had been built to be invisible to the Treasury's audit procedures. Lu Jin himself, in the same period, advanced his cultivation in private from the equivalent of the 6th foundation to the 8th. The advancement was the integrated result of the dual-aligned base he had absorbed from Bayou. The steady cultivation work he conducted across 2 hours every morning and 2 hours every night in the small private chamber Madame Lu had set aside for him in the household's eastern wing, and the dual-aligned cultivation manual he had purchased at considerable expense, through 3 intermediaries who had not been told who the manual was for, from a senior collector in the northern continent, who had been one of perhaps 4 living people in the empire who had known a copy existed. The manual was titled The Quiet Wolf's Walk. The title was, in Lu Jin's read of it, an unintentional joke that the manual's original author, a hermit named Shun by something, 800 years dead, had not been writing for him personally, but that nonetheless fit him better than any other cultivation manual he had handled. The manual described the dual alignment system the cosmic favor had marked him for. The system was not one of the orthodox cultivation traditions the sects taught. It was, the manual explained, a transverse cultivation that operated on the cultivator's existing base from a perpendicular axis. The transverse work allowed the cultivator to advance in foundation while remaining, in every visible measure, at whatever rank their original base had been at. It also allowed the cultivator to absorb the bases of other cultivators without producing any of the standard distortions of standard absorption practices. The manual had been written, shunned by something explained in the preface, for the kind of cultivator who needed to be operationally invisible to their adversaries for the longest possible window before revealing their actual capability. The manual had been written for the kind of cultivator Lu Jin was. He worked through it in private across the 2 years of the marriage, integrating the dual-aligned base he had absorbed from Bai Yu and Master Yin with the manual's instructions, advancing in private from the 6th foundation to the 8th across the 2 years, and presenting himself to the city of Huahai, to the household staff, to the brokerage's senior managers, to the casual acquaintances who knew him as Madame Lu's young husband, as a man whose cultivation was somewhere around the 3rd foundation and whose interests were primarily commercial. The performance was effortless. The performance was the point. By the end of the 2nd year, the partnership had grown to the size and shape Lu Jin had projected on the night Madame Lu had first accepted the terms. The 3rd target had not yet been identified. 5 remained on the list. In the 3rd year, the 3rd target arrived in Huahai on his own. Chapter 11. The Singer at the Spring. The young man's name was Wen Hao. He arrived in Huahai in the late spring of the 3rd year, traveling alone, in the unmarked traveling clothes of a wandering cultivator of no particular sect affiliation. He took a single room at a mid-tier inn on the 2nd wharf. He paid the innkeeper for 2 weeks in advance with newly minted imperial coin that did not match the kind of coin the Western continent's merchants used. He ate his meals in the inn's common room. He did not speak to anyone except the inn's staff. Ruan flagged him on the 3rd day. The flag was not based on cultivation anomaly. The flag was based on 3 small operational tells that Ruan's senior junior, a thin pale woman named Yi Hong who had been with the office for 4 years and who had developed, by Ruan's training, an unusual eye for foreign visitors, had identified across 2 days of watching the young man eat. The tells were these. The young man held his chopsticks wrong. He held them in a manner consistent with a person who had only learned to use them in adulthood, despite being, by visible appearance, a native of the central continent. He drank his tea by lifting the cup to his lips with both hands wrapped around the bowl, which was the Western continent's standard practice, but not the central continent's. And he, twice across the 2 days, hummed under his breath while eating, humming a melody that Yi Hong, who had grown up in a port city and had heard many foreign sailors, did not recognize as belonging to any of the empire's musical traditions. Ruan brought the flag to Lu Jin on the morning of the 4th day. Lu Jin read the report twice. He said, after the 2nd reading, the melody. Yi Hong wrote out what she could remember. The page is at the back of the report. Lu Jin flipped to the back. The melody was sketched in Yi Hong's neat brush, a sequence of notes scratched in the rough notation of someone who had been trained in the Empire's musical system and was attempting to record a sequence the system was not built to capture. The notation was approximate. Lu Jin looked at it for perhaps 10 seconds. He recognized it. It was the opening line of Take Me Home, Country Roads. He set the report down. He said, very quietly, Ruan. Lu Jin. Thank you. I will handle this one personally. I am going to ask you, in addition, to keep the report confidential. Do not, by any channel, share Yi Hong's flag with any other operator in the office. Yi Hong herself I would like withdrawn from the rotation on the inn for 1 week. I will replace her with a junior I have been training myself. The replacement is for operational reasons that I will not explain. Will you accept the request? She studied him across the lamps. She said, the request is unusual. It is. The target is unusual. The target is, by my read of the report, a particular kind of unusual that requires my personal attention without office support. I am not, in this case, willing to bring the office in. I am asking you to trust the read. I will brief you fully after the operation is complete. She held his eyes. She nodded once. She said, Yi Hong is withdrawn. The flag is sealed. The office will not pursue. The week is yours. I am informing you, however, that I expect a full briefing after the operation, regardless of outcome. I am also informing you that if the operation produces operational complications I have not been prepared for, the complications will be on your head. Acceptable? Acceptable. She left. Lu Jin sat alone in the back room for a long count. He had been waiting, since the night Madame Lu had accepted the 7, for one of them to be a fellow traveler. He had not been certain there would be one. He had hoped there would be. He had wanted, in the small private part of his thinking, to know whether the cosmic favor had set up the assignment as a closed loop with only him on the inside, or whether the cosmic favor had, for reasons of its own, installed at least one of the 7 as another transmigrator, as a kind of test or counterweight, or simply as an operational variable to make the assignment harder. The melody confirmed the second option. There was at least one other traveler. The traveler had been marked as a target. The traveler was now in Huahai, in a mid-tier inn on the second wharf, humming a song from a country that did not exist in this world. Lu Jin spent the next 4 days watching the young man personally. He did not approach. He watched from a distance. He watched from the wharfside tea houses across from the inn. He watched from the upper window of a fabric shop 2 doors down. He watched from a small boat he hired for 3 afternoons that drifted in the bay below the inn's waterside window. He watched the young man's habits, his routes, his cultivation practice in the inn's small courtyard at dawn and dusk, his evening walks along the western promenade. The young man was 21. He was Han Chinese in appearance, of average height, with a face that did not stand out in any direction. His cultivation, which he displayed openly in the inn's courtyard, in the manner of a wandering cultivator who wanted local sects to register his presence, was at the 4th foundation, with a fairly orthodox base that suggested he had been trained by one of the central continent's mid-tier sword schools. The cultivation was the cover. The hum was the truth. Lu Jin watched him for 4 days, identified his evening pattern, and on the 5th day rode out at mid-morning to a particular spot in the western hills above Huahai that the young man had visited each of the previous 2 evenings. The spot was a small stone spring in a glade of bamboo, at the end of a path that branched off the western road approximately 3 miles outside the city. The spring was a quiet local landmark. Locals went there occasionally to draw water for ritual purposes. The path was lightly used. The glade was, in the evenings between the 5th and 7th bells, almost always empty. The young man came to the spring each evening, sat on a flat stone at the spring's edge, drew a single cup of water in a small wooden bowl he carried, drank the water slowly, and sat for perhaps an hour looking at the bamboo. He hummed during the sitting. On the previous 2 evenings, by Lu Jin's observation through the bamboo from the far side of the glade, the hum had moved from the opening line of country roads to other songs Lu Jin recognized. Yesterday, Hallelujah, Wonderwall. The young man was working through the back catalog of a generation of American and British songs that had been popular in the country Lu Jin had also come from. And the working through had the quality of a man comforting himself with the music of a place he could not return to. Lu Jin understood the comfort. He had felt it in his own first months in this world, and had set it aside because the comfort was an operational liability. The young man at the spring had not set it aside. The young man at the spring had been carrying the comfort openly for at least the 4 days he had been in Huahai, and probably for the months or years of his life in this world before Huahai. The young man was not, by Lu Jin's read, a careful operator. The young man was, by Lu Jin's read, a person who had been dropped into this world and had used the cosmic favor's gifts to advance his cultivation without ever questioning the structure of the arrangement. That was, Lu Jin reflected as he tied his horse to a tree a quarter mile from the spring and walked the rest of the way on foot, a particular kind of waste. He arrived at the spring at the 5th bell. The young man was already there. He was sitting on his flat stone, with his wooden bowl at his side, his eyes on the bamboo. He was humming softly. The hum, today, was the opening verse of Country Roads. The young man had returned to the song he had begun with on his first evening, perhaps because the song was, of the catalog he had been working through, the one whose lyric most directly addressed his current state. He hummed through the opening verse. He paused at the end of the verse for a breath. Then, very softly, in a thin, clear voice that did not carry past the bamboo at the glade's edge, he began to sing the chorus in English. Country roads, take me home, to the place I belong. His voice trailed off after belong. He did not sing the next line. He sat with his eyes on the bamboo and his wooden bowl beside him, holding the silence after the line he had stopped at, with the late afternoon light golden across the spring's water. Lu Jin had stopped, 10 paces behind the young man, in the bamboo's shadow. He stepped forward. His boots made no sound on the moss. He walked, slowly, with his hands clasped loosely behind his back, around the spring to the young man's side. When he was 4 paces away, with the late golden light falling across the side of his face that the young man could see, he opened his mouth and continued the song from exactly where the young man had stopped. His voice was quiet. It was steady. It was the trained baritone he had developed in his old life from singing in his college's a cappella group, which had been one of the few small pleasures the old life had given him. He sang, in clear English, with the small lift of a smile at the corner of his mouth that he had not let himself show in Hawaii in 3 years. West Virginia, Mountain Mama, take me home, country roads. The young man went rigid. He did not turn. He did not breathe. He sat on the flat stone with his back to Lu Jin and the late golden light on his face and his wooden bowl by his side, and he held himself perfectly still for the span of perhaps 3 heartbeats. Then, very slowly, he turned his head. His eyes met Lu Jin's. The eyes were the eyes of a young man who had heard, in a language no one in this world should have spoken, a sentence that had been written 8,000 miles and 800 years away from any place this world contained. The eyes were the eyes of a young man whose entire operational map of who he was and where he was and what the rules of his life were had, in the span of those 3 heartbeats, been overturned. Lu Jin smiled at him. The smile was warm. It was, by every visible measure, the smile of a friend who had recognized another friend in an unexpected place. The smile did not, by any visible measure, contain anything threatening. The threat was in the eyes. The eyes were the eyes of a man whose smile did not match. The young man's bladder let go. A dark wet stain spread across the front of his traveling robe. He did not register the stain. He was, by every measure of his face, beyond registering anything except the impossible English that had just floated into his ear from a stranger who had stepped out of the bamboo at the side of a spring in a glade in the western continent of a world he had spent, Lu Jin would never learn how long, being slowly, comfortably alone in. He whispered, in English, in a voice that was barely a voice, "What?" Lu Jin took a 5th step closer. He kept the smile on his face. He said, in English, in the same quiet, steady baritone, "Hello. I've been waiting to meet someone like you for a while." The young man's mouth opened. The young man's mouth did not produce any further sound. Lu Jin reached him. He set his right hand, very gently, on the top of the young man's head. The gesture was the gesture of an older brother greeting a younger one. The gesture was also, by the precise placement of his palm against the young man's crown chakra, the operational frame for what came next. He said, still in English, still smiling, "I'm sorry." He drove the chi of his right palm down through the young man's crown into the dantian at the base of his belly, and he closed the dantian with a single sharp pulse. The young man died in 2 seconds. There was no blood. There was no struggle. The young man's eyes went out. His body sagged sideways from the stone. Lu Jin caught him with his left hand and lowered him to the moss beside the spring with the careful, slow movement of a man placing a sleeping child in a bed. He arranged the body neatly. He folded the young man's hands across his chest. The voice in his head said, "Third target removed." Compensation. Absorption of target's cultivation base. Initiated. The absorption took a count of 3. When it finished, the voice said, Target was a transmigrant practitioner of 4th Foundation, Orthodox Sword Path. Note: Target was a fellow traveler. Subject may have expected explanation. No further explanation will be provided. For remain. End. The voice cut off. Lu Jin stood beside the body in the bamboo shadow. He did not feel any particular thing. He had killed the young man cleanly, with the operational care the situation had required, and the work had been done well. He had also, by the singing and the smile and the precise, quiet performance of the recognition scene, given himself the one small piece of theater he had wanted to allow himself in this entire operation. The theater had no audience. The young man had been the audience. The young man was dead. He had let himself, for 1 minute, be the man who recognized another traveler. He had let himself sing a song from his old life in a glade in a world that should not have contained the song. He had let himself smile, openly, in a language no one else in this continent would hear or understand. He would not do it again. He had not, in 3 years, ever told another person in this world that he was a transmigrator. He had told Xiaosheng about the 7 and the cosmic favor. He had told Madame Lu the same. He had not told either of them the truth about where he had come from. The boy and the wife had been told that the cosmic favor had given him the assignment after he had reached a certain stage of his cultivation. They had not been told that he had been, in the moment of the assignment, a 34-year-old private equity associate who had died in a stairwell on a Tuesday. The truth was his alone. The truth was going to stay his alone. The young man at the spring had been the only other person in this world who could have known. The young man at the spring was dead. Lu Jin removed any trace of his own presence from the glade. He smoothed the moss where his boots had pressed. He cleaned the qi residue from the body with a particular technique from the quiet wolf's walk that the manual had included for precisely this kind of operational cleanup. He took the young man's small purse, the wooden bowl, the cultivator's identity tablet that the young man had been wearing on a cord around his neck. He pocketed the tablet. The tablet, by the partnership's intelligence office, would later turn up in the personal effects of a cultivator who had been killed in a tavern brawl in the central continent 3 weeks ago, in a manner that would lead any investigator to conclude the young man at the spring had been a thief operating under a stolen identity. The investigation, by Ruan's standard protocols, would close within a month. The body Lu Jin left for the local watch to find at their leisure. He walked back to his horse. He rode back to Huahai. On the way back, he passed a wagon of local farmers heading home from the city. The farmers nodded to him politely. He nodded back. He was just another evening rider on the western road, in plain dark clothes, with no visible reason to be remembered. He was not remembered. By the time he reached the city's western gate at the 7th bell, the song he had sung at the spring had been packed away in the back of his mind, with the rest of the artifacts from his old life that he had not allowed himself to revisit since the stairwell. He did not sing again in this world. Not once. Not at his wedding. Not at the parties Madame Lu hosted for the Western continent's senior merchants. Not in the bath at the household's eastern wing in the privacy of his own evenings. Not even, in the late years of his long life in this world, on the night he sat alone on the upper balcony of the house he had built for his old age in the southern hills, with a cup of plum wine and a clear view of the bay below and the small, distant lights of Hua, high 20 miles to the north. The song stayed in his head. The hum of the young man at the spring stayed in his head also. The two memories sat together in the same locked room in the back of his mind for the rest of his life. He did not, in that life, open the room again. Part 4. The Wider Map. Chapter 12. The Demon Prince. The fourth target took 2 years to find and 4 months to kill. The finding was the harder part. Ruan and her Central Continent office spent the first 18 months running a quiet sweep of cultivation anomalies across the empire's 9 provinces. The sweep produced 11 candidates of operational interest. Lu Jin, working from his study in Huahai with the consolidated reports, narrowed the 11 to 4. Of the 4, 3 turned out, by deeper investigation, to be talented but ordinary cultivators whose anomalies had natural explanations. The 4th did not. His name was Tan Wei. He was 24. He held the formal title of Second Prince of the Crimson Lotus Sect, which was the name of a small mountain sect in the empire's northern province, and which the cultivation world's main registries had, for the past 200 years, listed as a peaceful contemplative order with fewer than 50 disciples. The Crimson Lotus sect was the cover for a demon cultivation lineage that had been operating in secret since the empire's third dynasty had attempted, and failed, to extinguish it. The lineage had survived by going underground. The lineage had survived by going so far underground that even the empire's senior cultivation administrators no longer believed it existed. Tan Wei was its current heir. Tan Wei had been advancing his cultivation across the past 5 years by the methodical extraction of demonic essence from the captured cultivators. His sect's covert recruiting arm had been collecting from the empire's smaller mountain schools. The recruiting arm presented itself as a junior temple's pilgrimage circuit. Young cultivators who joined the pilgrimage did not return. The sect had absorbed approximately 90 such cultivators over the 5 years. Tan Wei was, by Ruan's senior analyst calculations, currently at the 8th foundation by the standard cultivation measure and perhaps at the 9th by his own demon-aligned reckoning. He was, in operational terms, a difficult target. He was also, Ruan's analysis noted, with the careful neutral phrasing of an intelligence officer who knew her client well, a target whose continued operation in the northern province represented exactly the kind of structural rot that the cosmic favor had marked for elimination. Tan Wei would, if left to develop for another 10 years, become the kind of cultivator who could not be removed by any operational method short of open war. He needed to be removed now. The how took 4 months of planning. The plan, in its final form, did not involve Lu Jin approaching Tan Wei directly. Tan Wei's personal cultivation made direct approach untenable. Lu Jin, in private at his own 8th foundation, was a match for Tan Wei, but not a comfortable one, and the cost of an open confrontation would have been operational exposures that the partnership could not afford. The plan involved, instead, the careful manipulation of the empire's existing cultivation administration to do the work for them. The empire maintained, in each province, a small senior office called the Office of Heterodox Affairs. The office's nominal role was to investigate suspected demon cultivation activity. The office's actual operations had, over the past century, been reduced to the periodic prosecution of small village shamans and the occasional shakedown of merchant houses whose senior members had been accused of corrupt practices. The office's senior officials were, by the empire's general pattern, lazy and underpaid. They were also, by their formal authority, the only persons in the empire who could legally call down the Imperial Army's senior cultivator division on a demon cultivation case. The senior cultivator division had not been deployed in 83 years. Lu Jin had the division deployed in the 4th month. The deployment was the result of a complex piece of intelligence work coordinated by Ruan's Central Continent office. The work involved, in summary, the careful planting of documentary evidence in the Crimson Lotus sect's outer libraries, the quiet recruitment of a junior sect disciple, a young man named Hu had been one of Lu Jin's small handful of cultivation contacts in the Central Continent, and who had agreed to act as the witness in exchange for permanent operational sanctuary with the partnership after the operation, the staging of a discovery of the planted evidence by who then defected from the sect with the evidence and presented it to the Northern Province's Office of Heterodox Affairs, the careful management of the office's senior official, who was, by Ruan's prior research, deeply in debt to a merchant house that was a junior partner in the quiet trade, to ensure the official would treat the evidence as credible and forward it to the imperial court. and the parallel cultivation through 3 other channels of the Imperial Court's senior official for cultivation matters, who had been quietly receiving, for the past 2 years, periodic intelligence packages from an unidentified source that had positioned him to be receptive to a major demon cultivation case when one arrived. The senior official forwarded the case to the Imperial Cultivator Division. The division mobilized 300 senior cultivators, under a commander named General Pei Lan, marched on the Crimson Lotus Sect's mountain compound in the late autumn of the 3rd year. The compound's outer defenses fell in 2 days. The compound's inner sanctum, where Tan Wei had retreated with his 12 senior disciples, held for 4. On the morning of the 5th, the inner sanctum's wards failed under General Pei Lan's coordinated cultivator assault, and the inner chamber's final defense was breached. Tan Wei died at the hands of General Pei Lan's personal sword. The voice in Lu Jin's head, which had been waiting, by his accumulated experience with the previous 3, for confirmation, said, on the morning General Pei Lan's report reached Hua Hai by Imperial Courier, 4th target removed. Compensation. Absorption of target's cultivation base. Initiated. The absorption took 12 seconds. It was the heaviest he had received. Tan Wei's cultivation base was the largest he had absorbed, and the demon-aligned components required additional integration work to settle properly into his existing dual-aligned base. The absorption left him sitting on the floor of his private study with sweat across his forehead and his breath coming in slow controlled pulls for almost a quarter of an hour. When he recovered, he was at the equivalent of the 11th foundation. The voice said, target was a demon-aligned practitioner of 8th foundation. Subject's base has integrated a 3rd alignment. Subject is now TRI aligned. 3 remain. End. He sat on the floor of his study with the warm late afternoon light coming through the eastern window. 3 remained. He had 3 more pieces of work to do, and the cosmic favor had not been generous with hints, and the work would, by his honest projection, take another several years. He stood up. He went to find Madame Lu. She was in her own study, going over the brokerage's quarterly accounts. He sat across from her at her writing desk. He said, Tan Wei is dead. The report arrived this morning. The absorption is integrated. I am at the 11th by the orthodox measure. The cosmic favor has marked me tri-aligned. 3 remain. She looked at him across the desk. She set her brush down. She said, 3. By your projection. 3 to 5 years to find them. 6 months to a year for each operation. Perhaps 4 years more for the full sequence. By the 7th year of the marriage, the work is complete. The 7th year of the marriage. Yes. She studied him in the late afternoon light. She said, Lu Jin, Madame Lu, you have, in the past 3 years, become a different man than the boy who walked into my back room. The change has been gradual. I have watched it. I would not, by my own assessment, describe the change as a worsening. I would describe it as the slow, patient settling of a man into the shape his nature was always going to take. I am, in this hour, going to say something I have not said to you before. The shape your nature has settled into is a shape I am, at 66, quietly pleased to have been in close proximity to during the settling. I am, in addition, going to say that the 7th year of the marriage is, by my own internal arithmetic, the year in which I had been planning to begin the conversation about my own retirement from the active operational side of the partnership. The 7th year is, by your projection, the year your work is complete. The 2 timelines are aligned. I am going to suggest, when the 7th year comes, that we both step back from the active operational side, and that the partnership transition to its 2nd generation of operators, Ruan, Baimu, Shaosheng, and whichever further partners we have identified between now and then. You and I will, in the 7th year, become the senior advisors of the operation rather than its active operators. We will live in this house, or in another house we agree on. We will travel. We will read. I am informing you of this so you may calibrate. He looked at her across the desk. He said, "The 7th year. The 7th year. I will calibrate." Good. She picked up her brush. She returned to her accounts. He sat across from her for another count, watching her work in the late afternoon light, and registered that the small piece of his old life he had buried in the back of his mind on the morning of the spring had, by Madame Lou's quiet, patient work across 3 years, been slowly replaced by the new piece his new life had built around him. He had not, in his old life, ever sat across a desk from a woman whose presence at the desk had been a piece of his own quiet, steady comfort. He had not allowed himself the comfort. He had been busy. He was busy here too. The comfort, however, was different here. He let himself, for the second time since the stairwell, sit in the comfort without putting it away. The 7th year would come. In the meantime, 3 remained. Chapter 13. Ji Yen. The 5th target found Lu Jin. She rode into Hua Hai at the second bell of evening on a clear, cold day in the 5th winter of the marriage, on a horse that was carrying her last. The horse was thin, foam at the mouth, and one of its forelegs was wrapped in a bloodied cloth. The woman on its back was no better off. Her riding coat was torn across the left side. Her left arm hung at an angle. Her face, under the city gate's lamp, was the face of a woman who had been riding hard for many days and had come to the end of what she could ride for. She fell off the horse in front of the gate captain. She said, in a voice that was almost gone, "Sanctuary." The gate captain, who was on Madame Lou's payroll, gathered her up and took her not to the watch house, but to the back door of Madame Lou's tea house, which was the standard protocol for unusual arrivals. Madame Lou's senior steward sent for Lu Jin. He came to the tea house at the 3rd bell. The woman was in Madame Lou's private upstairs chamber, lying on a low couch under a clean blanket, with Madame Lou herself sitting beside her and a household physician, not the official one, but a quiet woman the household had retained for sensitive cases, setting the dislocated arm. The woman's face under the lamp was perhaps 30. Her hair was dark, cut short, with the practical short cut of a woman who lived on a horse. Her features were sharp. Her skin was the deep tan of someone who spent her days in the sun. She wore, under the torn riding coat, the plain dark traveling clothes of a wandering cultivator with no sect affiliation. She also wore, around her neck on a thin cord, a small jade tablet that Lu Jin recognized from 3 years of Ruan's intelligence reports on the Empire's eastern continent. The tablet was the personal mark of the Eastern Empress. The woman was Ji Yen, only daughter of the late Eastern Emperor, who had been killed 8 months ago by his own younger brother in a palace coup. Ji Yen had, by the Eastern continent's intelligence flow that had reached Hua Hai across the past months, been the senior figure of the royalist resistance against the usurping uncle. Ji Yen had been driven from the Eastern continent's capital 2 months ago. Ji Yen had been moving west along the central trade routes ever since, evading the usurper's senior assassins and the assassins of 2 minor sects that had aligned with the new throne. Ji Yen had, by every intelligence report, been presumed dead 3 weeks ago at a small mountain pass in the central continent's eastern range. She was not dead. She was on Madame Lou's couch in Hua Hai, with a dislocated arm, asking for sanctuary. Lu Jin sat down in the chair the steward had set for him. He said, in a voice that did not carry past the chamber, "Ji Yen." The woman on the couch opened her eyes. She said, in a voice that was still almost gone, "You know my name. We have been tracking the Eastern situation since the coup. Your reported death 3 weeks ago was a piece of information our office did not entirely believe. We had been waiting to see whether you would surface elsewhere. You have surfaced here. The surfacing is, operationally, the most useful thing that has happened to this office in the past 2 years." She looked at him through the pane. She said, "You are the one. The traitor who runs the city. I have heard your name in 3 separate cities on the way west. The name has been described as someone who, if I could reach him, might be the kind of operator whose support I could request. The name has been getting around. It has. We will discuss the support when you have rested." The chamber is yours for as long as you need it. The physician will set the arm and treat the other wounds. The household is at your disposal. We will provide you with food, clothing, and a courier to send messages to whatever surviving members of your faction you wish to contact. Madame Lu and I will speak with you at length when you are able to speak. Until then, rest. She closed her eyes. She said, very faintly, "Thank you." She was asleep within 30 seconds. Lu Jin stood up. He stepped out of the chamber with Madame Lu. They went down to the back room. He closed the cedar door. He said, "She is one of the 7. Madame Lu looked at him. She said, "How do you know?" "I have been working on the reed since the steward sent for me. The cultivation she has been displaying on the couch is at the 7th foundation. The cultivation she has been concealing by my reed of the small tells under the displayed base is at the 9th, possibly 10th. The Royalist resistance's military victories under her personal command across the 8 months of the coup are not consistent with a 10th foundation commander. They are consistent with an 11th or 12th. She is, by my honest reading, the 5th target. The 5th target who has just asked us for sanctuary." "Yes. You intend to kill her." He looked at Madame Lu and the lamps. He said, "I do." "How?" "With care. The killing must not, in its operational shape, leave any trace of the partnership. The Eastern Empire's royalist resistance has, even in its current degraded state, a substantial network of senior agents across the continents who would, if they registered our hand in her death, take operational reprisal that the partnership cannot afford. The killing has to be entirely external to us." "External how?" He sat with this. He said, "The usurper. The Eastern usurper has been hunting her for 8 months. The usurper has assassins. The assassins have not been able to find her because she has been moving fast. The assassins do not yet know she is in Huahai. If the assassins were to learn, through a channel that does not implicate us, that she is in Huahai, the assassins would come. The assassins would, given the cultivation gap between the usurper's senior assassins and her own current degraded state, succeed. We would provide sanctuary in good faith, fail to protect her against the assassins despite the good faith, and would emerge from the situation with our operational reputation intact. The intelligence office would, after her death, take operational reprisal against the usurper's network on her behalf, which would generate operational profit for the partnership and would consolidate our position in the Eastern continent. The killing would, in operational reality, be a single piece of work whose visible authors would be the usurper's assassins, not us." Madame Lu listened without interrupting. When he finished, she sat for a long count. She said, "The operation is clean." "It is. It is also, Lu Jin, the operation of a man who has, in 3 years, become operationally cold in a way that the boy in the back room 3 years ago was not." He looked at her in the lamps. He said, "The boy in the back room 3 years ago was already cold. The boy hid it better. The man you have lived with for 3 years has been gradually showing the coldness because the operations the partnership has been running have required him to operate without the hiding. The hiding is the operational compromise the boy was making to seem like a 16-year-old. The man is no longer 20 by the body's count, and is 40 by the count of the inner tenant, and is, by every measure I am willing to apply to myself, exactly the operator the partnership requires. I am not, Madame Lu, going to apologize for the coldness. I will, however, take seriously whatever reservation you are about to raise." She looked at him. She said, "The reservation is not, Lu Jin, about your operational coldness. The reservation is that I have just spent the past hour in the upper chamber with a woman whose face under the lamp was the face of a woman who has been carrying the weight of an empire for 8 months alone. I am, at 66, not unfamiliar with the carrying. I had, in the past hour, registered her as a person whose continued operation in the world might be of value to me beyond her function as a target on your list. The reservation is that I am asking you, before you execute the operation you have just described, to consider whether the partnership might be better served by approaching her differently. He sat very still. He said, approaching her differently. Yes. Your suggestion? The suggestion is that we provide her the sanctuary in good faith, that we additionally provide operational support for her return to the Eastern continent against the usurper, that we install her on the Eastern throne at the head of a restored royalist administration, and that we acquire, through the relationship we will have built across the operation, the Eastern continent's commercial and intelligence integration into the partnership for the long term. The Eastern continent has, by Ruan's standing assessment, perhaps 3 times the commercial scale of the central continent. The integration would multiply the partnership's reach by a factor I have been waiting 6 years to find an angle on. Ji Yin is the angle. You have been planning this since you first heard her name. I have been planning it since the steward sent for you tonight. Before tonight, I had no operator I could plausibly anchor the Eastern integration through. Tonight I have one. The operation I am proposing produces a much larger long-term outcome for the partnership than your operation. It also, Lu Jin, does not require us to kill a woman whose continued operation in the world might, in addition to its commercial value, be operationally worth a great deal to the partnership in ways neither of us has fully mapped. He looked at her in the lamps. He said, Madame Lu Jin, the cosmic favor has marked her as a target. The reward for her elimination would be substantial. The cultivation absorption would, by my projection, take me into the upper foundations of the standard system. The compensation is not a small thing. The compensation is not a small thing. The operational outcome of your operation is also not a small thing. But, Lu Jin, the operational outcome of my operation across the next 20 years is approximately 100 times larger. I am asking you, in the careful arithmetic the partnership has been built on, to consider the trade. He sat with the trade. He had not, in 3 years, ever encountered a situation in which the cosmic favors contract and the partnership's larger operational interests pointed in different directions. He had assumed, until tonight, that the two would always align. The assumption had been wrong. Ji Yin was the first case in which the alignment broke. He sat with the question for a long count. The voice in his head did not speak. The voice had not, in 3 years, ever volunteered an opinion on the operational arrangements he made around the targets. The voice had only confirmed kills. He said, slowly, Madame Lu Jin, we will run your operation. You will not pursue her. I will not pursue her. The cosmic favor has marked her. The cosmic favor can, by my own honest reading of 3 years of the contract, wait. The partnership's larger interests are, in this case, the larger consideration. The cosmic favor will have to be patient. If, at some later point, the partnership's calculus on her changes, we will revisit. For now, she lives. We will install her on the throne. We will integrate the Eastern continent. We will become, across the next 20 years, the operation you have just described. Madame Lu nodded. She said, one further consideration. Yes. The configuration of her relationship with the partnership across those 20 years will, by my honest projection of how this kind of operation runs, develop in directions that I am informing you of in advance, so you may not be surprised. Ji Yin, by my read of her in the upper chamber, is the kind of operator whose attachment to the persons who restore her throne will be deep, lasting, and, by the standard pattern of restored empresses, likely to take personal forms in addition to operational ones. The personal forms will be directed at the senior operators of our partnership. I am, at 66, not, Lu Jin, in the operational position to be one of those senior operators in the personal sense. You are. One is. By Mu is. The directions of attachment will, by my projection, settle on one or more of the 3 of you across the years of the restoration. I am informing you so you may calibrate. He looked at her. He said, you are telling me, with operational frankness, That the woman upstairs is going to fall in love with me or with one of my senior partners across the next several years. I am telling you that the configuration the operation will produce makes it likely, by every read of how such configurations have historically settled. I am not, Lu Jean, informing you of this with any reservation. I have been your wife for 3 years. The marriage has been a partnership, not a possession. I have not, at any point, registered any operational claim over your personal arrangements that the partnership did not require. I am informing you so you may, when the time comes, not make the configuration awkward by attempting to refuse her on my behalf. I would, in fact, prefer you accept her, because the acceptance will strengthen the partnership's operational anchor in the Eastern continent for the next 2 decades. He looked at her. He said, "You are an unusual woman. I have been told that before. You are also, Madame Lu, the most operationally generous person I have ever worked with. The generosity is not generosity. It is the same operational calculation I have brought to every other piece of the partnership. The calculation produces the most useful outcome. The generosity is what the calculation looks like from the outside." He laughed. It was a short, dry laugh, the laugh of a man who had been outmaneuvered in his own operational logic by a partner who knew his logic as well as he did. He said, "Understood. Good." The operation that followed ran for 14 months. Ji Yin recovered in Madame Lu's house across the first 3. She and Madame Lu spoke at length across those weeks. The conversations produced, by their end, a working partnership between the 2 women that, by Ruan's later assessment, became one of the structural features of the Eastern integration for the next 20 years. She and Lu Jin spoke also. The first conversation between them was not until the 5th week. Ji Yin had insisted, by her own operational protocol, on waiting until she had restored enough of her cultivation to face him from a position of operational dignity. The conversation, when it came, lasted 4 hours and ranged across the Eastern continent's political map, the usurper's senior network, the royalist resistance's surviving senior officers, and the long, careful question of what it would take to put her back on the throne. It also, in its final hour, ranged into questions of who Lu Jin was, where the partnership had come from, and what kind of operator he was beneath the careful public face of the Western continent's senior merchant. He gave her the same cover story he had given Madame Lu. She, by her own read of him across the 4 hours, did not entirely believe the cover. She did not press it. She did, however, register him in the manner Madame Lu had projected she would register him. She did not, in that first conversation or in any of the others that followed across the next 12 months, make the registration into anything operationally awkward. She was an empress. Empresses, in the Eastern continent's tradition, had configurations of attachment around them that did not require the early conversational acknowledgments the Western continent's courtship traditions required. The configuration developed across the months. By the time she rode back to the Eastern continent at the head of a restoration force the partnership had spent 6 months assembling, the configuration had been quietly established and did not require formal naming. She took back the throne in the 12th month of the operation. The usurper was killed in the throne room of the Eastern Palace by Ji Yan's own sword. The royalist administration was restored. The partnership's Eastern integration began on the morning of the restoration and was operationally complete within 2 years. Across the same 2 years, Ji Yan returned to Huahai twice. Once for the formal renewal of the Eastern Alliance, once for what she described in her formal correspondence as consultation with the partnership's senior operators. The consultations were not, in operational reality, primarily about the alliance. They were the formal frame within which the configuration that had been established in Madame Lu's house was, by her own preference, continued. Lu Jin had, across those 2 years, registered that he was, by Madame Lu's projection and Ji Yan's quiet preference, now in a configuration with 2 senior partners, whose operational and personal arrangements with him were structured differently but pointed in compatible directions. He registered the configuration without resistance. He had not, in his old life, ever expected to be in such a configuration. He had not, in this life, planned for it. The configuration had arrived, by Madame Lu's operational generosity and Ji Yan's quiet sovereign decision, as the structural consequence of an operation he had originally proposed to run as an assassination. He accepted the configuration on the operational terms the configuration had produced. The list had 4 kills outstanding. 3 of them were strangers he had not yet identified. The 4th was the woman who now ruled the Eastern continent. He was, by his own private accounting, going to leave the 4th where she was for as long as the partnership held. The cosmic favor had not protested. He took the silence as consent. Chapter 14. The Sword Saint. The 5th kill came in the 6th year of the marriage. The target was a young Taoist named Mu Qing of the Bright Cloud Temple in the Central Continent's southern range. He was 23. He was the orphan grandson of a famous sword master who had died at the age of 104 3 years before Mu Qing's birth. He had been raised at the temple. He had taken the formal vows at 14. He had emerged at 20 as the senior sword disciple of the temple, with a cultivation base that the temple's elders had been quietly comparing to the legendary records of the great Taoist sword saints of the 7th dynasty. He was, by every visible measure of his life, the kind of bright, pure hero a cultivation novel would have been written around. He was also, by Ruan's 12 months of patient observation, one of the 7. The anomaly was not in his cultivation. The anomaly was in his daily prayer book. The temple's senior disciples kept formal prayer books in which they recorded their daily meditations. The books were public. Any senior disciple could read any others. Mu Qing's book, Ruan Senior Jr. had managed to read it on 3 separate occasions during a temple festival across the past year, contained, on its closing page, a list of names. The names were not the names of his fellow disciples, or his teachers, or his ancestors. The names were the names of the 4 senior elders of 3 rival Taoist sects on the Central Continent, plus the names of 2 senior elders of the imperial court, plus the names of 2 senior cultivators of the empire's military. 8 names. The list was titled, in Mu Qing's own neat brush, Those Who Must Fall. The list was not a prayer. The list was an operational target list. Mu Qing, by his quiet, patient project across the past 4 years, had been preparing to remove 8 senior figures of the Central Continent's cultivation and political establishment in order to clear the operational ground for his own ascension to a particular position the establishment was currently blocking. The position was the formal headship of the Taoist Council, which was the empire's senior arbiter of cultivation matters and which had, across the past century, drifted into corruption that the bright, pure hero had decided, in private, to correct by the methodical removal of its corrupt members. Mu Qing was, in his own self-conception, the righteous reformer. He was, in operational reality, the kind of hero whose reformation would, by Ruan's careful read of the cultivation establishment's politics, produce a power vacuum that Mu Qing himself would fill, and which would, across the decade after he filled it, settle into a new orthodoxy more rigid and more enforcing than the orthodoxy he was replacing. He was the cosmic favor's 5th target because the cosmic favor, in Lu Jin's developing theory of what the cosmic favor was actually doing, had identified Mu Qing as the kind of righteous bright reformer whose long-term operational effect on the continent would be approximately as damaging as Master Yan's quiet harvesting of junior disciples or Tan Wei's demonic cultivation pyramid or Bayou's merchant treason. Different mechanism. Same effect. Lu Jin found the analysis satisfying. He had been wondering, for some time, what the cosmic favor's underlying selection logic was. The logic he could now begin to articulate was long-term structural threat to the continent's general well-being, regardless of the target's personal moral framing. The cosmic favor did not care whether the target was a villain or a hero in his own narrative. The cosmic favor cared about the target's eventual operational footprint. Lu Jin found that he agreed with the cosmic favor's selection logic. He was, in the operational sense, the cosmic favor's local enforcement arm. The cosmic favor was, in the operational sense, a quiet senior strategist with whom he was working in parallel toward a continent he had no particular emotional attachment to but had decided, on operational grounds, was worth keeping in a functional shape. He killed Mu Qing in the autumn of the 6th year. The killing was conducted by the same method as by Yu's, through the use of the existing Imperial Cultivation Administration. Mu Qing's prayer book was, by Ruan's careful planting of a complementary set of evidentiary documents, intercepted by a senior elder of one of the 3 rival Taoist sects he had marked for removal. The senior elder, who had, by his own intelligence network, been suspicious of Mu Qing for some time, took the prayer book to the Imperial Taoist Council. The council convened an emergency session. Mu Qing was formally accused of sect treason, was placed under arrest at his own temple, was tried by a panel of senior council elders, and was executed by the council's senior enforcement officer on the morning of the 3rd bell of a clear cold day in the early winter. Lu Jin was, again, present in the spectator gallery. He had ridden to the central continent for the execution under the cover of a commercial trip on by Mu's authorization. He sat in the 3rd tier of the temple's public viewing courtyard, in plain dark clothes, with his hat low. The blade fell at the 3rd bell. The voice in his head said, 5th target removed. Compensation, absorption of target's cultivation base. Initiated. The absorption took 5 seconds. Mu Qing's cultivation was the cleanest he had absorbed. The young man's base, at the 10th foundation by the orthodox measure, was the work of a lifetime of disciplined orthodox practice, with none of the rough edges of Baiyu's intensity or the dark integration of Tan Wei's demonic accumulation. The qi entered his dantian and settled with the smooth, low hum of a piece of equipment that had been precisely manufactured and properly tested before delivery. The voice said, Target was a 5th path practitioner of 10th foundation. Subject's TRI-aligned base has integrated a 4th alignment. Subject is now quad-aligned. 2 remain. End. 2. He rode back to Huahai across the next 12 days. He spent the ride thinking about the remaining 2. By the operational pattern of the previous 5, Master Yin in the sect, Baiyu in Huahai, Wen Hao at the spring, Tan Wei in the northern province, Mu Qing in the central continent. The cosmic favors targets had been distributed across the empire's full geographic and operational range. The remaining 2 would, by the same pattern, be located in the parts of the empire the partnership had not yet operated in. The most likely candidates were the southern continent, where the partnership had a small presence through the Spirit Stone mining concessions, but no senior operational footprint, and the imperial capital itself, where the partnership had been deliberately keeping its profile low to avoid the kind of imperial court scrutiny that would have disrupted the quiet trades operations. He arrived back in Huahai on the 12th day. He called a senior partnership meeting at the 3rd bell of evening. The meeting was attended by Madame Lu, Ruan, by Mu, Xiaosheng, and by Special Imperial Courier, a representative from Jiyan's Eastern Administration named Lady Wen, who had been in Huahai for the past 3 weeks on the formal renewal of the Eastern Alliance. Lady Wen was Ji Yan's senior intelligence officer. She had been authorized, by Ji Yan's private instructions, to participate in any senior partnership meetings during her stay. Lu Jin presented the situation. He said, 2 remain. The most likely operational locations are the southern continent and the imperial capital. We have limited footprint in both. We will need to establish operational presence in both before we can begin identification. By Mu, the southern continent. The Spirit Stone mining concessions are our existing anchor. Can you, in the next 12 months, expand the concessions into a full operational presence? Baimu nodded. she said. I have been preparing the expansion for the past year. The framework is ready. We can deploy in 6 months. Good. Rouen, the imperial capital. We have, by my preference, avoided the capital. The avoidance is no longer operational. We will need to establish a presence. Discreet. Cover identity. Intelligence-focused. No commercial visibility. Can you build it? Rouen nodded. She said, I have been preparing a cover. The cover is an aristocratic widow with mid-tier court connections. The widow would establish residence in the capital's outer quarter and would, across 2 to 3 years, develop the informal contacts that produce intelligence. The widow's identity has been built across the past 4 years against the eventual need. The identity is operationally ready. Whose identity is the widow? Mine. He looked at her across the table. He said, Your own identity. Yes. I have been preparing it across 4 years on the projection that the partnership would, at some point, require senior intelligence presence in the capital. The presence requires a senior operator. The senior operator must, by the imperial court's social structure, be operating under a cover that the court accepts. The aristocratic widow cover gives me operational standing the office could not otherwise acquire. I am, Lu Jean, proposing to deploy the cover when you authorize. He looked at her. He had, in 6 years of working with Rouen, registered that she had been preparing operational moves whose scope he had not, at the time, fully understood. The widow cover was one of those moves. She had, by the steady patient work of 4 years, built a full identity that would, when deployed, allow her to operate at the imperial capital senior court for as long as the cover required. He said, The deployment is authorized. You will leave for the capital within the month. The partnership's Eastern integration will provide whatever supplementary cover documentation the identity requires. Lady One, please convey to the Empress my formal request that the Eastern administration provide a senior letter of introduction for the widow's arrival in the capital. Lady One bowed. She said, The letter will be ready before Rouen's departure. Good. By Mu, the Southern Continent expansion begins next month. Madame Lu, household coordination from Huahai. Shaosheng, you will be my personal liaison to both the capital and the southern operations. You will travel between the 3 for the next several years. I will remain at Huahai as the operations strategic center. The meeting ended at the second bell of morning. Rouen left for the imperial capital 18 days later. Bai Mu's southern expansion deployed within 6 months. By the end of the 7th year of the marriage, Madame Lu's projected year of mutual retirement from active operations, neither the 6th nor the 7th target had yet been identified. The retirement was postponed. Madame Lu did not press. She accepted the postponement on the strength of the operation's continuing trajectory. She did, however, on the evening she and Lu Jean formally agreed to postpone, mention, with the dry, quiet humor she brought to most of her observations of him, that the 7 were, by her own assessment, going to take him another decade to finish. She was, by approximately 2 years, correct. Chapter 15, Rouen's capital. Rouen's identity in the capital was the widow of a deceased mid-tier court official named Lu Ji. The Lu family had been a minor branch of one of the capital's 7 great clans. Lu Ji himself had, in the cover Rouen had been building for 4 years, with the careful cooperation of 3 living members of the actual Lu family who had been quietly cultivated through Madame Lu's network, been a fictional second cousin of the actual Lu family's current head, who had died 11 years ago in the southern continent at a posting that had been remote enough that the death and the marriage and the widowing had all been plausibly invisible to the capital's main social register. The actual Lu family head, by Madame Lu's quiet arrangement, formally vouched for Rouen's identity on her arrival in the capital. The household was real. The deceased husband was real. The widowing was real. The widow was, in operational truth, a different person than the original. The substitution was operationally seamless. Ruan spent the first 18 months of her capital residence establishing the widow's social presence. She attended the appropriate temple ceremonies. She made the appropriate condolence calls. She accepted invitations to mid-tier court gatherings. She gradually built, by the patient, careful method she had spent 4 years preparing for, a social network of approximately 70 mid-tier court officials and their families whose continued conversation with her produced, in the quiet hours after each gathering, the kind of operational intelligence the partnership had not previously had access to. She also, by the end of the second year, identified the sixth target. The target was a young man named Pei Fan. He was 26. He was the third son of the Pei family, which was the second of the 7 great clans. He held the formal title of Junior Secretary of the Imperial Records, which was a sinecure that required him to attend the Imperial Archives for 1 afternoon a week and produce no actual work. He was, by Ruan's careful observation across 9 months, the kind of mid-tier court official whose obvious unimportance was the cover for an operational footprint considerably larger than his title suggested. Pei Fan was running, from his position in the Imperial Archives, a quiet operation to gradually rewrite the Empire's official genealogies. The rewrites were small. They were also patient. They had been ongoing for the past 6 years. By Ruan's reconstruction, the rewrites were, across the next decade, going to install Pei Fan's own branch of the Pei family as the heirs to a particular dormant imperial title that the actual genealogies did not entitle them to. The title, when activated by the rewrites, would give the Pei family an operational position approximately equivalent to a minor imperial principality. The position would, by the standard logic of the capital's politics, position the family for further ascendancy across the following generations. Pei Fan was, in operational terms, executing a long, patient coup against the Empire's genealogical infrastructure. He was, in cultivation terms, at the 7th foundation by the orthodox measure and, by the small operational tells Ruan had identified, probably at the 9th by some other system she had not yet mapped. He was, by every read, the 6th. Ruan brought the analysis to Lu Jin in the autumn of the 8th year of the marriage. Lu Jin spent 4 months planning the operation. The operation, in its final form, used the same template as by Yu and Mu Qing. The rewrites Pei Fan had been making to the imperial genealogies were, by the Imperial Archive's own internal procedures, recoverable by a senior records auditor if the auditor knew which entries to look at. Ruan, across the past 2 years, had identified which entries. Ruan also, across the same 2 years, had identified the senior records auditor whose career trajectory and personal grievances against the Pei family made him the right channel for the exposure. The auditor's name was Master Hu, no relation to the long-dead Master Hu of the Azure Wind sect, and he was 63, 20 years into his current position, and had been quietly waiting for an operational opportunity to undermine the Pei family ever since the Pei family had, 11 years ago, arranged the demotion of his own elder brother from a senior court position. The grievance had not faded. Ruan, by careful work across 6 months, gave Master Hu the operational opening he had been waiting for. The exposure was filed in the spring of the 9th year. The Imperial Court convened an emergency session. The Pei family senior elders, who had not known about Pei Fan's operation, were horrified. The Pei family attempted to disavow Pei Fan as a rogue actor. The disavowal was, by the Imperial Court's standard skepticism, only partially accepted. The Pei family senior elders were permitted to retain their court positions on the condition that Pei Fan was formally renounced by the family and surrendered to the Imperial Court's enforcement office for prosecution. The Pei family surrendered him. The prosecution took 6 weeks. Pei Fan was found guilty of imperial genealogical fraud, which was a capital offense by ancient imperial law. He was sentenced to execution by beheading at the Imperial Enforcement Compound in the capital's Eastern District. Lu Jin attended the execution. He sat in the spectator gallery in the same clothes he had worn at Bai Yu's execution 6 years earlier, in the third tier, with the same low-brimmed hat. Ruan, in her widow's persona, sat in the fourth tier separately. They did not acknowledge each other. The execution proceeded by the imperial standard ceremony. The blade fell at the third bell. The voice in Lu Jin's head confirmed the kill, transferred the cultivation, and noted the integration of a fifth alignment. The integration took longer than the previous absorptions. Pei Fan's cultivation, by the fifth alignment, included elements that did not fit smoothly with the 4 Lu Jin already held. He spent the 4 days after the execution in private cultivation at the inn where he was staying in the capital, working through the integration. By the 4th day, the new base had settled. He returned to Hua Hai with Ruan, who had, by Lu Jin's request at the end of the execution day operation, concluded her widow's persona on the formal grounds that the recent excitement at court had made her decide to retire to a quieter southern residence to mourn her late husband in privacy. The persona was archived in the partnership's intelligence office records for possible future use. One remained. Chapter 16, the last one. The 7th took another 6 years. The cosmic favor had, by Lu Jin's reading of the silence, been patient about the postponement of Ji Yin and was now patient about the remaining target. The voice did not speak. The voice had not, in the years since Pei Fan, volunteered anything. The partnership continued. The quiet trade grew. The Eastern integration consolidated. Ji Yin ruled the Eastern continent across the years with the careful, methodical work of a restored empress who knew she owed her throne to the partnership and who had, by the configuration she had been quietly maintaining with Lu Jin across the years, operational reasons to keep the partnership flourishing. Madame Lu stepped back from active operations in the 10th year of the marriage and became, formally, the partnership's senior advisor. Ruan became, formally, the head of the intelligence office. Bai Mu became, formally, the senior of the commercial operation. Xiao Sheng, by then 21 years old, taller than Lu Jin, with a quiet competence the boy in the storeroom had grown into, became Lu Jin's deputy on the strategic side. The household at Hua Hai expanded. Madame Lu and Lu Jin's residence accommodated, by the 11th year of the marriage, a second senior occupant, Ruan, who, after the conclusion of her widow's persona and her return to Hua Hai, and after a careful series of conversations across 2 years that Madame Lu had quietly facilitated, moved into the household's western wing on a long-term basis. The configuration that Madame Lu had foreseen 3 years before its actual settlement had settled. Ji Yin visited the household twice a year. The Eastern Empress's visits were treated, by the household, as the visits of a senior partner. She had her own rooms in the household's southern wing. The configuration with her was, by long mutual preference, conducted with the careful operational discretion the Eastern continent's traditions required. The configuration with the 3 women, Madame Lu as senior partner and former active operator, Ruan as senior partner and current intelligence head, Ji Yin as senior partner and visiting empress, was the configuration of Lu Jin's middle years. He did not, by his own preference, add further senior partners across the years that followed. The configuration had settled at 3. 3 was the number he had operational room for. He had, in addition, the operational partnerships with Bai Mu and Xiao Sheng, neither of which had developed into the personal configurations the 3 senior partners shared. Bai Mu, by her own quiet preference, kept her personal life entirely separate from the partnership. Xiao Sheng, by the same kind of preference, was, by his early 20s, in a long quiet relationship with the senior daughter of one of the southern continent's merchant families that Bai Mu's expansion had brought into the quiet trade. The relationship was, by every read of it, the right shape for him. The 7th target was identified in the 15th year of the marriage. The target was a woman. Her name was Su Lin. She was 32. She was the senior abbess of a small mountain shrine in the southern continent's remote southern range. a shrine called the Eight-Pillar Hermitage that had, for the past 40 years, been functioning as a quiet center for the kind of cultivation that the Orthodox sects had decided 2 centuries ago to designate as outside the standard tradition. The cultivation tradition Su Lin practiced was called the Old Path. It was, by every operational measure Lu Jin's now extensive cultivation knowledge could apply to it, the cultivation tradition the cosmic favor itself appeared to be operating on. The Old Path was the original system of the 7-path alignments. The system had been suppressed across the empire's recorded history because its practitioners had, across that history, consistently produced cultivators whose operational footprint was the kind of footprint the empire's senior cultivation administrators had registered as destabilizing. Su Lin was the senior living practitioner of the Old Path. She was, by the empire's official records, a forgotten figure. Her shrine was visited by perhaps 3 pilgrims a year. Her own cultivation was, by Lu Jin's quiet assessment, conducted through 3 intermediaries who had traveled to the shrine across a careful 8-month sequence, at the equivalent of the 14th foundation by the Orthodox measure and probably at the equivalent of the 16th by her own Old Path reckoning. She was, by every measure, the most cultivated single individual in the empire. She was also, Lu Jin's intermediaries had confirmed, the source from which the cosmic favor had been operating across the 7 targets, in a manner Lu Jin would need to confirm in person. The confirmation required him to visit the shrine in person. He visited the shrine in the 16th year of the marriage. He went alone. He left Huahai in the early spring, traveled south by horse and by ship across 2 months, and arrived at the foot of the 8-Pillar Hermitage's mountain at the end of the 3rd month. The mountain was not particularly tall. The path up was not particularly steep. The hermitage was visible from the foot of the mountain, a small group of stone buildings on a high ledge, with a single white flag flying from the central building's roof. He climbed the path. He reached the hermitage at the 7th bell of evening. Su Lin was sitting on the stone steps of the central building. She was waiting for him. She had, by the visible evidence, been waiting for some considerable time. Her tea had cooled, her cushion was worn from her sitting, and her eyes had the quiet, patient attention of a person who had been watching the path for several hours. She did not stand when he reached the steps. She said, in a low, even voice that did not lift toward the end of the sentence, "Lu Jin, Su Lin, you have come further than the previous 6. The previous 6 were closer to my own operational paths. You were not. I know. You have been waiting for me. For 15 years. Since you absorbed Master Yin and the system you carry confirmed the first kill. I felt the absorption. I have been watching the sequence since." He looked at her in the late evening light. She was 32. She had the small, still face of a woman who had spent 20 years on this mountain. Her hair was gathered at her nape in a simple plain knot. Her clothes were the gray traveling robe of a senior practitioner. She wore no jewelry. She wore no shoes. He sat down on the steps beside her without invitation. She did not object. He said, "The cosmic favor, the system you carry, is from you. Not from me directly. It is from the path I serve. The path has, across the empire's history, periodically marked practitioners whose operational shape made them threats to the path's continued operation. The path has, equally periodically, marked outside operators whose work could remove the threats. The marking is the system. The system is the path's operational arm. The path itself does not have hands. The path requires hands. You are the path's senior living practitioner. I am. You marked the 7. I marked the 7. I marked you to remove them. The marking is the only operation I am authorized to perform. The removal is the operator's work. The removal is, by the path's own constraints, conducted entirely on the operator's terms. I do not, Lu Jin, set the terms. I have only marked the targets and the operator. The operator has done the rest." He looked at her in the evening light. He said, "I am the 7th target. You are not. The The 7 were the 7 you have already accounted for. Master Yan, Bai Yu, Wen Hao, Tan Wei, Mu Qing, Pei Fan, and the one you have, by your own decision, chosen to leave unkilled, the Eastern Empress Ji Yan. The 7 were the targets the path needed removed for the operational stability of the continent across the next several centuries. You have completed 6. The 7th, Ji Yan, you have chosen not to remove. The path accepts the choice. The Empress's continued operation in the Eastern continent has, by your work with her, taken a shape that does not destabilize the path's operations. The 7 are, by the path's accounting, complete. He sat very still. He said, "Then why am I here? Why did the system bring me to you?" She looked at him in the late evening light. She said, "The system did not bring you to me. You came to me on your own initiative. The system has not, by any of the markers it carries, ever pointed you toward this mountain. You have been working on the 7th assumption for 15 years. The 7th has never existed. The 6 you have completed plus the 1 you have chosen to leave alive completes the contract. The compensation for the 7th, which the system has been waiting to deliver since the operation began, was contingent on the resolution of the 7th, not on the 7th's death. You have resolved the 7th by your choice to leave Ji Yin alive. The system's compensation is now available. I am, Lu Jin, sitting on these steps to deliver it. The compensation requires a senior path practitioner to officiate. I am the only living senior path practitioner. I have been waiting for 15 years for you to choose to come." He looked at her in the late light. He said, "The compensation is the path senior teaching. The teaching is the cultivation manual I would have given you on the day Master Yin died, if you had been ready to receive it. You were not ready. The path senior teaching cannot be received until the practitioner has, by their own operational decisions, demonstrated that they are the kind of practitioner the path can entrust the senior teaching to. You have, across 15 years, demonstrated. The most recent demonstration was your decision to leave Ji Yen alive on the operational grounds that her continued life served a larger pattern. The decision is the kind of decision the path senior teaching is structured around. The senior teaching is now yours, if you will accept it." He looked at her. He said, "What does the senior teaching do? It allows you to operate, in the cultivation sense, on the level the path itself operates on. You will become, in time, a path-aligned cultivator. The path-aligned are the practitioners through whom the path conducts its long operations across the centuries. There are not, at present, any other living path-aligned cultivators. The previous path-aligned practitioner died in the 16th dynasty. The current dynasty is the 24th. The gap has been long." He looked at her in the late evening light. He said, "You are not path-aligned. I am not. I am the senior orthodox practitioner of the path's teachings. I have not taken the alignment. The alignment requires a practitioner whose operational life has been the path's hands. The path's hands across the past dynasty have been you. I am the teacher. You are the operator. The alignment is, by the path's own structure, your inheritance." He sat with this. He said, after a long count, "Su Lin, Lu Jin, the alignment. Yes. What does it cost?" She looked at him. She said, "The alignment requires the practitioner to continue operating as the path's hands for the duration of the practitioner's life. The practitioner's life, by the alignment structure, is extended to approximately 300 years. The work the practitioner conducts across those 300 years is the work of removing, by whatever operational means the practitioner prefers, the practitioners and political figures whose operational shape would destabilize the continent across the centuries. The work is the work you have been doing for 15 years. It would continue. It would be the work of your life." He looked at her in the late light. He said, 300 years. Approximately. By the path's accumulated records, path-aligned practitioners have lived between 270 and 340 years. The partnership. The partnership is your operational arm. The path does not require the partnership to be disbanded. The partnership would continue. The senior partners, Madame Liu, Ruan, Jian, Bai Mu, Xiaosheng, would, by your continued cultivation work, also extend their lives to the degree their own cultivation can support. Madame Liu is currently 78 by the body's count and is, by my read of her in your accumulated reports, in the kind of cultivation state that would extend her life by perhaps another 40 years under your continued cultivation transfer. Ruan and Ji Yin would extend further. Bai Mu and Xiao Shang, who are still in their operational prime, would extend the furthest. The partnership you have built would, by your alignment, become a multi-century operation. The operation would be the path's primary instrument across those centuries. He sat with this. He sat with it for a long count. He said, very quietly, Su Lin, Lu Jin, I accept. She nodded. She said, the alignment ceremony requires 3 days. I will conduct it in the central building. We will begin tonight, after the 7th bell. The ceremony will not be, Lu Jin, comfortable. The path will, across the 3 days, reorganize the cultivation base you currently hold into the path-aligned base. The reorganization will be painful. The pain is structural. You will not be in operational danger. You will be in operational discomfort. I will be present throughout. You will not be permitted food or water during the 3 days. After the 3 days, you will be path-aligned. You will not, by the alignment structure, be the man you are now. You will be a different man, with the same memories and the same operational dispositions and the same partnerships, but with an internal structure that has been remade by the alignment. The remaking is the cost. Accepted. He looked at her in the late evening light. He said, accepted. She rose from the step. She turned and walked into the central building. He followed. The ceremony began at the 7th bell. It ran for 3 days. When it ended, on the morning of the 4th day, Lu Jin walked out of the central building and stood on the high ledge of the 8-pillar hermitage and looked east across the southern range. He was a different man. He was also, in every operational way that mattered, the same man. The cultivation in his dantian was now aligned to the old path itself. The voice in his head, which had not spoken since Pei Fan, was gone. The system had completed its operation. The compensation had been delivered. The contract had closed. He stood on the high ledge in the morning light. He registered that his old life, the stairwell, the senator's son in the bathtub, the 34 years of private equity work he had not, since the morning he had woken in this body, allowed himself to think about for any extended period, felt now like the memories of a different person whose life he had once read about in detail and had not, since the reading, returned to. The life on this mountain, in this body, with the partnership in Huahai, with 3 women whose configuration with him was the structural feature of his domestic life, with 3 centuries ahead of him to do the work he had been built to do. This life was the life. The old life was the source material. He had used the source material to build the life. The using was complete. He turned to Su Lin, who was standing in the central building's doorway behind him. He said, "What next?" She looked at him in the morning light. She said, "You go back to Huahai. You resume the partnership. You begin the long work of the alignment. The path will, across the next 3 centuries, mark new targets as the political and cultivation structures of the continent shift. You will remove them by the operational methods you prefer. The partnership will support you. The work is open-ended. I will be here, at the Hermitage, for the rest of my own life, which by my own cultivation is perhaps another 50 years. I will be your senior advisor on path matters. You will visit me when the work requires consultation. Otherwise, the work is yours." He nodded. He said, "Su Lin, Lu Jin, thank you." She did not respond to the thanks. She turned and walked back into the central building. He walked down the mountain at the 2nd bell. He reached the foot of the mountain by the 7th bell of evening, mounted his horse, and rode north for Huahai with the warm spring wind at his back and the path-aligned cultivation in his dantian humming quietly under his sternum like a piece of equipment that had just been switched on for the first time and would, by its own internal logic, run for the next several hundred years. Epilogue. He lived 317 years. In those 3 centuries, the partnership at Hua Hai became, by the slow, patient work of 7 generations of operators, the senior commercial and intelligence organization of the empire. The buy-house brokerage absorbed, across the first century, the spirit stone licensing operation of the imperial treasury itself, with the formal cooperation of 3 successive emperors whose own ascensions Lu Jin and the partnership had quietly facilitated. The Eastern Empire under Ji Yan's long reign, extended by Lu Jin's cultivation transfer to 186 years, became, by the 2nd century, the imperial seat itself, when Ji Yan's grandniece by adoption inherited the central imperial throne by the marriage Ji Yan herself had arranged with the 2nd century's 3rd emperor. Madame Lu lived to 124. She died in her own bed at Hua Hai, with Lu Jin and Ruan and Ji Yan at her side, in the small upper room of the household's eastern wing that she had taken as her own residence in her retirement years. Her death was peaceful. She had, by her own quiet judgment, declined further cultivation extension after the 100th year, on the grounds that she had become operationally bored with the continuing centuries and had decided to step out. Ruan lived to 197. She continued running the intelligence office into the 2nd century, training across that time approximately 40 senior operators whose work shaped the partnership's intelligence reach across the empire. She died at her own residence in the household's western wing, in the 3rd year of the 2nd century after the marriage, in the company of the operators she had trained. Ji Yan lived to 186. She abdicated the Eastern throne in her 140th year, traveled briefly through the southern continent on a project of her own that had no operational connection to the partnership, and spent her final 46 years at Hua Hai in the household's southern wing, in a configuration with Lu Jin that, by her own preference, was conducted with the quiet that had characterized the configuration from its first night in Madame Lu's upper chamber. Bai Mu lived to 141. She ran the commercial operation until her 120th year. She married, at 63, long after she had registered, by her own quiet assessment, that her senior years would be empty of personal arrangements unless she initiated one. A senior merchant of the central continent whose company she had decided, after 30 years of professional correspondence, that she wanted in her life. The marriage was, by every account she shared with the partnership, a happy one. Her husband died at 92. Bai Mu lived another 15 years after his death and concluded her own life at a quiet retreat in the southern continent that she and her husband had built together for their old age. Xiaoxing lived to 173. He took over the strategic side of the partnership from Lu Jin in the 8th decade after the marriage, freeing Lu Jin for the past long work of identifying and removing the targets the system marked. Xiao Sheng's own long relationship with the southern merchant family's senior daughter became, by his 60th year, a settled marriage that produced no children but produced a household at the partnership's southern commercial center that became, in turn, a regular gathering place for the partnership's 3rd and 4th generations of senior operators. Xiao Sheng's wife lived 138 years. He survived her by 35. He died at the southern center, in the household he had built, with 3 of the partnership's most senior operators at his bed, and a small note for Lu Jin in his right hand that contained, by Lu Jin's account when he received it 3 days later, exactly 6 words in a hand the boy had used since the storeroom. Senior brother. The work was good. Lu Jin himself, in his 317th year, on a clear cold morning in the late autumn, climbed the high ledge of the 8-pillar hermitage one final time. Su Lin had been dead for 61 years. The hermitage had been kept, since her death, by a small succession of senior practitioners she had trained for the role. The current keeper was a woman of perhaps 40 who had been at the Hermitage since she was 8. Lu Jin spent his final morning at the Hermitage in the central building's upper room. The path-aligned cultivation in his dantian had, by his own internal assessment, been gradually slowing across the past decade. The slowing was the alignment's natural close. He had, by his own count, removed across the 3 centuries approximately 190 further targets the system had marked. The empire he was leaving behind was, by every honest measure, in better operational shape than the empire he had arrived in. The work was done. He sat in the central building's upper room with a cup of plain water in his hands. He thought about the stairwell. He had not, in 3 centuries, thought about it for more than perhaps 3 or 4 extended moments. He thought about it now. He registered that the man who had fallen down the stairs had been a young man who had not yet learned how to use the operational mind he had inherited from his particular childhood, and that the man who had been built, across the centuries, on top of that young man's bones was a man who had used the mind well. He registered, in the same quiet way, the song the young man at the spring had been singing. He hummed it, once, very softly, in the privacy of the upper room with no one listening. He set the cup down. He closed his eyes. He died at the 7th bell. His body was, by his own prearranged instructions with the Hermitage's keeper, cremated at the high ledge by the dawn of the following morning. His ashes were taken north by courier to Hua Hai, where the partnership's 4th generation of senior operators, who had never met him personally and who had, across their own careers, registered him as the half-legendary founder of an operation that had been running for 3 centuries, received the ashes with the careful, formal ceremony the partnership had developed for the occasion. The ashes were interred in the household's eastern courtyard, beneath the small twisted pine that had, by Lu Jin's planting in the 2nd year of his marriage, replaced an earlier pine that had died in the household's 10th year. The pine continued to grow. It would, by the time the partnership's 8th generation of operators arrived at the household for their senior gatherings, be approximately the size of the small twisted pine in the courtyard of the Azure Wind sect that Lu Jin had, across 3 centuries of his quiet operational life, never returned to or thought about again. The empire continued. The partnership continued. The path continued. In the hands of the next path-aligned practitioner the system would, in time, mark and prepare. The wolf was gone. The fold he had been in had, by his quiet, patient work, become a different fold than the one he had walked into on a Tuesday in a body with a bleeding ear. Fin.